The sky above Wiltshire burned the color of old bruises, streaked with violet and soot-black, as the dawn refused to break clean. Draco stood at the edge of the scorched drive, his breath shallow, his wand clutched so tightly in his fist that the knuckles had gone the same pale as his hair. The air tasted of birch sugar, and something deeper, charred oak, yes, but also iron, like blood baked into stone. Malfoy Manor was gone, or nearly. The west wing had collapsed in on itself like a dying animal, its gables now heaps of blackened timber and shattered glass. The great front doors hung from one hinge, warped into grotesque shapes, their silver inlays melted into silver tears that dripped down the stone steps. But the east wing, where the old library and the ancestral vaults lay, remained, not untouched. No, flames had clawed at its windows, blackening the mullions, yet the walls stood defiant, their ancient stones unbroken. Smoke curled from the roof like a slow exhalation, and the silence that followed the fire was worse than any scream. No birds, no wind. Even the trees at the edge of the property bowed away, as if repelled. Draco stepped forward, boots crunching on glass and ash. His cloak snagged on a splintered iron gatepost, tore, but he didn't stop. The wards were gone. He felt it in his bones, the hollow absence where magic once hummed beneath the soil, beneath the foundation stones. The enchantments that had guarded this place for centuries, layered by Malfoy's long turn to dust, had been unmade. Not broken, unmade. As if something had reached in and whispered them out of existence. He reached the steps. The heat still radiated from the stone, but not the dry heat of fire. This was damp, clinging, like breath from a fevered mouth. His fingers brushed the doorframe. The wood hissed faintly where his skin touched it, and the single drop of black liquid oozed from the grain, sliding down like a tear. He closed his eyes. Star father never believed in accidents. Star a rustle behind him. Light footfalls on cinder. He turned, wand raised, heart hammering against his ribs. Draco. Hermione Granger stood at the edge of the ruin, wrapped in a deep blue cloak, her hair pulled back, but already escaping in wisps around her face. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something sharper, recognition, as if she, too, could feel the wrongness in the air. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice raw. "I felt it," she said, stepping forward. "The magic, it screamed. At least it did to those who know how to listen." She paused, gaze sweeping the ruin. "This wasn't fire, was it?" He lowered his wand just slightly. "No, not ordinary fire. It didn't consume. Its star chose star." She came closer, careful not to step on the shards of a shattered crest, silver serpent on black stone. "There's something underneath. I can feel it, like a heartbeat in the walls." Draco looked back at the surviving wing. The windows were dark but not empty. He'd seen a flicker earlier, just for a second, deep within the library's upper chamber. A pale light, pulsing once, twice, then gone. "They're still down there," he whispered. "Who?" He didn't answer. The Malfoy vaults weren't for gold. They were for memory, for curses, for things that should never wake, and something had woken them. The Ministry owl arrived at dawn, talons tapping insistently against the frost-laced windowpane of Hermione's flat above Diagon Alley. She stirred beneath the patchwork quilt, one hand already reaching for her wand before her eyes were fully open. The bird was silver-gray, its feathers edged in Ministry crimson, and it extended a sealed scroll with a formality that felt almost mocking. She broke the seal with a flick, and the parchment unfurled with a quiet crackle, as if charged with static. "Star, by order of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Senior Investigator Hermione Granger is hereby summoned to the site of the Malfoy Manor fire, Wiltshire, for immediate assessment of magical anomalies and residual enchantments. Apparition authorized under Statute 47B, Emergency Magical Containment. Star." She exhaled sharply. Malfoy Manor, of course. She had read the brief reports. The fire had erupted past midnight, contained within the estate grounds, yet no one had seen flames until the east wing collapsed. No dragon, no cursed object, no known incendiary spell matched the magical signature. Just fire that burned blue at the edges, and left behind ash that shimmered faintly, like crushed mica. And now they wanted her star. Trashed her. Kane meant. Hermione dressed quickly, pulling on sturdy boots and a heavy cloak, winding warming charms. She tucked her wand into her sleeve and stepped into the hearth, ash swirling around her. As she spoke the coordinates, the world spun, a blur of green flame and distant voices, before she landed with a soft thud on cracked marble. The air outside was thick with the smell of damp soot and old magic. What remained of Malfoy Manor stood like a broken crowd against the grey morning sky. Towers that once pierced the clouds now leaned precariously, their spires reduced to jagged stumps. Ivy, blackened and brittle, clung to the stone like scorched lace. The gardens were a wasteland of charred hedges and shattered statues, their faces melted into grotesque masks. And there, standing amidst the ruin, was Draco Malfoy. He was thinner than she remembered, his face sharper, the aristocratic planes of it carved deeper by shadow and strain. His hair, once meticulously slicked back, hung loose and slightly uneven, as though he'd taken a knife to it himself. He wore a long coat of dark wool, buttoned to the throat, but it did little to hide the tension in his shoulders. "You're late," he said, voice cool, but frayed at the edges. "I was asleep," she replied, brushing soot from her sleeve, "and I didn't exactly rush to answer a summons to star your starred doorstep." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I didn't request you specifically, Granger. But they say you're the best of unraveling cursed architecture. I'm not here to rebuild your family's pride, Malfoy." She stepped forward, eyes scanning the remains. Already she could feel it, the hum beneath her feet, like a pulse in the earth. This wasn't just fire. Something was star awake. "Star here." He didn't answer right away. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "I didn't start it. I didn't even know it was possible." She turned to look at him then, really look. There was no smirk, no sneer, only a weariness that made her pause. "What aren't you telling me?" He glanced at the blackened foundation of the west wing. The wards, they didn't fail. They star-changed star. Like they remembered something. Something older than the Malfoys. Older than Hogwarts. He swallowed. "And when the fire came, I heard singing. From beneath the floor." Hermione's breath caught. "Singing?" In a language I don't know, but it felt familiar. He met her gaze. "Will you help me find out what it was?" She hesitated. Old wounds ached. The war, the hatred, the scars hidden beneath robes and pride. But beneath it all, the magic was calling. And she had never been able to walk away from a mystery. "Show me where it started," she said at last. He nodded, and together they stepped into the ashes. The air hung thick with the scent of charred oak and damp stone, a cloying miasma that clung to Hermione's robes as she stepped across the cracked threshold. What remained of Malfoy Manor stood like a broken jaw, jagged walls, blackened beings jutting into the grey morning sky, and a silence so heavy it seemed to press against her eardrums. Draco walked several paces behind her, his boots crunching over splintered marble and shattered glass. He hadn't spoken since they apparated to the edge of the estate, and even now his silence was less sullen than wary, as if the ruins themselves might swallow him whole. Hermione knelt near the center of what had once been the grand hall, running gloved fingers over the scorched flagstones. The fire had been vicious, magical in origin, that much was certain, but it hadn't consumed everything. Patterns remained, etched into the stone beneath layers of soot, faint and almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. She murmured a soft cleaning charm, and the grime peeled away like burnt parchment, revealing a spiral of runes that pulsed faintly beneath her touch. "This isn't Parseltongue," she said, more to herself than to him. Draco shifted. "No, my family didn't use that kind of script." "No," she agreed, frowning. "This is older, much older. Predates the Malfoys by centuries, I'd wager." She pressed her palm flat against the stone. A low hum vibrated up her arm, not heat, but energy, subtle and insistent, like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the earth. Her breath caught. "There's magic still active here. Not residual, not left over from the fire. This is sustained, anchored." Draco crouched beside her, his gray eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. The wards collapsed during the blaze. Everything should be inert." Not everything, she whispered. She traced the outer edge of the spiral, then murmured an incantation, ancient, careful, one she'd learned from a crumbling grimoire in the restricted section. The runes flared a deep cobalt, and for a moment the air above them shimmered, revealing a translucent lattice of silver threads, webbing beneath the floor, stretching outward into the foundations. Hermione gasped. It's a containment structure, not just protection. Containment. Something was sealed beneath this house long before your ancestors ever claimed it. Draco's jaw tightened, and now the fires cracked it. Yes. She looked up at him, her gaze steady despite the unease gnawing at her, and whatever was inside, it's stirring. A gust of wind swept through the skeletal remains of the manor, carrying with it a whisper, not in any language, but in sensation. Cold, hollow, and strangely mournful. The stones beneath them trembled, just once, like a breath drawn after long silence. Draco stood abruptly. We should go. No, Hermione said, rising slowly. Not yet. If this magic predates your family, then they might not have even known what they were sitting on. The fire didn't just destroy, it might have woken something. She turned in a slow circle, wand raised, casting a delicate detection charm. The tip glowed faintly, then flared as it pointed toward the east wing, what little remained of it. Beneath the rubble, the pulse grew stronger. Not a heartbeat now, but something closer to a chant, wordless and low, resonating through the bedrock. There's a chamber down there, she said. Buried, warded. And whatever's inside, it knows we're here. Draco didn't move. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. My father always said this land was unsettled. He never explained why. Thought it was just superstition. It wasn't, she said. This magic isn't dark. Not exactly. But it's not benign either. It's old magic, Draco. The kind that remembers when the world was different. Then, it doesn't care about your name, or your blood, or your regrets. He looked at her then, really looked, his mask slipping just enough to show the fear beneath. Not for himself, she realized, but for what might come because of him, because of what his family had unknowingly kept caged. Hermione touched his arm just once. We'll figure this out, but we do it carefully, together. The wind stilled. The chant beneath the stones faded but did not vanish, and somewhere, deep below, something exhaled. The air above what remained of Malfoy Manor still shimmered with heat, even though the fire had burned itself out days ago. Charred beams jutted from the earth like broken bones, and the scent of scorched oak and something older, something metallic and strangely sweet, clung to the wind. Draco stood at the edge of the ruin, his cloak pulled tight against the autumn chill, his face pale but composed. He didn't turn when he heard footsteps approaching across the cracked stone path. You're late, he said, voice clipped. I was summoned, not invited, Hermione replied, her breath forming small clouds in the air. She adjusted the strap of her satchel, eyes scanning the devastation. And I had to get clearance from the ministry. You can't just owl me coordinates and expect me to come running. This isn't a social call, Draco snapped, finally turning. His gray eyes were shadowed, the usual arrogance dulled by something deeper, exhaustion, perhaps, or dread. Something's wrong. The wards didn't just fail. They were unraveled star, and whatever started the fire, it didn't burn like ordinary flame. Hermione frowned, stepping forward. Her boots crunched on blackened gravel. You're saying it was magical arson? I'm saying it wasn't an accident, he corrected, voice low. And the ministry's too busy sniffing around for political leverage to care about what's really buried here. She studied him a moment. There was no sneer, no mocking twist to his mouth. Just a quiet urgency that unsettled her more than any insult could. Why me, she asked. Because you're the only one stubborn enough to dig through cursed rubble without waiting for permission, he said, turning away. And because you've dealt with ancient enchantments before, the Department of Mysteries won't touch this. They say the magic here is unstable, too old, too alive. A cold prickle ran down Hermione's spine. Alive? Draco didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the ruin, waving his wand in a slow arc. The air hummed and faint blue sigils flickered above the ground, symbols she didn't recognize, glowing like veins beneath ash. They pulsed once, twice, then dimmed. These weren't here when I was a child, he said quietly. They're beneath the foundation, older than the house, older than my family. Hermione knelt, brushing soot from a stone slab. Her fingers traced the edge of one glyph. It warmed beneath her touch, and for a heartbeat she thought she heard whispering, soft, sibilant, like wind through dead leaves. She pulled back sharply. "You felt that too?" Draco asked. She nodded, frowning. "This isn't Parseltongue, but it's related. A dialect, maybe. Pre-Saxon, possibly. I've seen fragments in the Black family archives, but nothing complete. We're not the first to live here," Draco said. "My father always said the land was chosen, that the Malfoys were stewards, not owners." "I thought it was just his usual grandstanding." "It wasn't," Hermione murmured. She opened her satchel, pulling out a charmed notebook and a self-inking quill. "There's residue, layers of binding spells, layered over centuries. Someone, or something, was star-sealed here." Draco went very still. "Sealed?" "Yes." She looked up. "And if the fire broke the outer wards, whatever was inside might not be contained anymore." A gust of wind howled through the ruins, stirring the ash into spirals. For a moment the sigils flared crimson, and a low vibration thrummed through the ground, like a heartbeat rising from the earth. Draco's hand went to his wand. "We need to find the source, before someone else does." Hermione met his gaze. Old grudges hummed between them, years of slights, battles, words sharper than blades. But now, standing in the shadow of a house that remembered things, even the Malfoys had forgotten. Those wounds felt distant, smaller. "Fine," she said, "but we do this my way. No reckless wand-waving, no secrecy. If we're digging up something dangerous, I need to know everything." Draco hesitated. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "Everything I know." It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a beginning. Fragile, uneasy, forged in ash and silence. The air beneath the manor was thick with the scent of damp stone and old smoke, a cloying mix that clung to the back of Hermione's throat. Her boots crunched over broken glass and charred wood as she stepped forward, wand raised. The light at its tip trembled slightly, casting long wavering shadows across the cracked walls of the hidden staircase. Draco followed close behind, his breath steady but his silence heavier than usual. They had found the entrance behind a collapsed tapestry in what used to be the East Library, something Hermione noticed while tracing residual magic with her fingers. The stone there had hummed faintly, pulsing like a slow sleeping heart. "This wasn't on any of the estate maps," Draco murmured, his voice low. "Not even the ones my father kept locked in the study." "No," Hermione agreed. "It wasn't meant to be." The stairs spiraled down, narrow and steep, the walls slick with moisture. Runes, faint and barely visible, lined the edge of each step, ancient. Older than the Malfoys, older than the house itself. She paused, brushing her fingers over one. It flared faintly under her touch, a dull gold light, flickering like dying embers. "Be careful," Draco said, his hand hovering near her arm. "That's not standard warding." "I know," she whispered. "It's a binding. A ward meant to contain, not protect." They reached the bottom. The door ahead was iron, blackened by time. It surfaced, etched with a pattern of interlocking circles and jagged lines. No handle, no keyhole. Hermione pressed her palm flat against it. The metal was cold, unnaturally so, and for a moment nothing happened. Then a low groan echoed through the stone, and the door sank inward, disappearing into the wall like mist. The chamber beyond was untouched, not just unburned, untouched. The air was still and dry, as if time had stopped at the threshold. A single stone table stood in the center, covered in dustless parchment. Books lined the shelves along the far wall, their spines intact, their pages whole. But it was the floor that made Hermione's breath catch. A massive sigil had been scorched, or perhaps burned into being, into the stone. 12 feet across, it pulsed with a deep crimson light beneath a layer of ash that hadn't fallen from the fire above. The lines were precise, etched with purpose. Runes spiraled outward from the center, some in languages she barely recognized, others that made her skin prickle with unease. It wasn't just magic, it was alive. Draco stepped forward, his boots silent on the stone. He stared at the sigil, his face pale. "I've seen this before," he said, "in a dream when I was a child." Hermione turned to him, startled. "What?" He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the center of the sigil, where a single blackened handprint was pressed into the stone. "My mother used to lock me in my room on certain nights. She'd whisper, 'Don't listen to the house. Don't answer if it calls.' I thought she was afraid of Father. But now, I think she was afraid of this." A soft sound echoed through the chamber. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing. Not words, a name, or a summons. Hermione's wand trembled. Something still bound here. Draco took another step forward. The sigil flared, the crimson light deepening. Shadows along the walls shifted, not from the movement of their light, but from within themselves. "No," she said, reaching for him. "Don't—" But he was already kneeling, his hand outstretched toward the handprint. "Draco, stop." His fingers hovered an inch above the stone, and the chamber exhaled. The air in the Hogwarts library was thick with dust, and the quiet hum of ancient spells woven into the shelves. Hermione's fingers trailed along the spines of crumbling tomes, her breath shallow as she pulled one forward with a soft crackle of brittle leather. It was heavier than it looked, bound in what might have once been silver thread, now tarnished to the color of old blood. She carried it to the corner table where Draco sat, his posture stiff, one hand absently tracing the jagged scar along his forearm. Not the dark mark, faded now to a silvery tracery, but the deeper grooves left by fiend fire. "You've been gone an hour," he said, voice low. "Find something, or are you just indulging your obsession with dead languages?" She ignored the jab, lowering the book with care. "This isn't about Malfoy pride or forgotten curses. It's older than that. The land? The ground the manor sits on. It wasn't always yours." He stilled. "What are you talking about?" She opened the book. Pages whispered as they turned, revealing ink so dark it looked freshly spilled, though it had dried centuries ago. The script was angular, archaic, pre-war, possibly pre-Hogwarts. "This is a land registry from the 10th century. Most of it's lost, but a few fragments survived in the restricted archives. The Malfoys acquired the estate in the late 1200s, but the land was already enchanted. Someone else lived there, long before." Draco leaned forward, his gray eyes narrowing. And who precisely was someone else? She tapped a passage, her finger trembling slightly. "The Veilthorn. A bloodline so old they predate the founding of the Ministry. They were, according to this, keepers of boundary magic, guardians between worlds. Their magic wasn't about power the way yours or mine is. It was about balance, thresholds, doors that shouldn't be opened." He exhaled sharply. "That sounds like superstition, does it?" She turned the page. The sketch stared up at them. A manor built into the side of a cliff, towers spiraling like bones, roots curling around its foundations. Beneath it, runes pulsed in red ink. This is the same land, the same ley lines. The Veilthorn didn't just build a house, they anchored something. And when they vanished, whatever they were guarding stayed. Draco's jaw tightened. "And you think the fire wasn't an accident," she finished. "It was a release. The enchantments under the manor, they're waking up. The wards are fraying but not collapsing, reactivating. I felt it when we were there, sifting through the ash, the ground, it hums." He looked away, toward the window where the last light of dusk bled into violet. "My father never spoke of them, grandfather either. Because they wanted it forgotten," she said softly. "Or because they didn't know. Bloodlines can be erased. Draco, names scratched from history. But magic remembers." A silence settled between them, heavy with implication. He rubbed his temple. "So we're not just dealing with rubble in memory. We're digging through someone else's grave." "Not just digging," she said. "Disturbing." Outside, the first stars blinked into being. Inside, the candle beside the book flickered, its flame bending as though pulled by an unseen draft. The pages rustled, though no wind had touched them. And then, faint from deep in the library's shadowed stacks, came a sound like footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The kind that belonged to something that has waited a long time to be heard. Hermione's hand closed around her wand. Draco didn't move, but his voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "You feel that?" "Yes," she whispered. "It's not alone." The air in what remained of the east wing tasted of char and old spells. Draco stood barefoot on the soot-streaked marble, the cold biting through the thin soles of his boots. Above, the roof had caved in, leaving a jagged mouth open to the bruised twilight. Rain had begun to fall, soft, persistent, and it hissed where it met the smoldering beams. He shouldn't have come here alone. He knew that, but something had pulled him back, like a thread tied around his ribs, tugging. Hermione had left hours ago, retreating to the temporary wards she'd erected near the edge of the property, muttering about residual enchantments and the need for proper documentation. She'd offered to stay. He'd refused. Now, in the silence between the raindrops, he heard it again. A whisper, not in his ears but inside his skull. A woman's voice, low and singing, syllables in a tongue he didn't know, but somehow understood. It curled around the back of his thoughts like smoke. He turned, heart quickening, but saw only the skeletal remains of the drawing room, the scorched tapestries hanging like funeral shrouds. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Show yourself." No answer, just the creak of a beam, the drip of water into a cracked basin. He stepped forward, oat crunching on broken glass. The floor was uneven, warped by heat, and as he crossed the threshold into what had once been the morning parlor, the air thickened. A pressure built behind his eyes. Then, movement. A figure, half-formed, flickered in the corner of his vision, not quite solid, not quite ghost. A woman in a long dark dress, her hair braided with silver thread. She wasn't looking at him. She was reaching for something on the shelf that no longer existed, her fingers brushing empty air. Draco froze. "Mother?" he breathed. But no, this wasn't Narcissa. The woman was taller, her features sharper, her presence heavier, like the air before a storm. She turned her head just slightly, and he felt it. A cold rushed out his spine. Her eyes were open, but they were filled with smoke. He stumbled back. The vision wavered, then dissolved like ink in water. His breath came fast. He pressed a hand to the wall, fingers brushing the scorched wood paneling. Beneath the grime, the grain formed a pattern, interlocking spirals, almost like writing. He hadn't noticed it before. Hermione had mentioned ancient wards, older than the house, older than the name Malfoy. But this was different. This was memory. "Draco?" He flinched. Hermione stood in the archway, her coat damp, her hair frizzed from the rain. She held a lantern in one hand, its light trembling. "You weren't supposed to come back here alone," she said, her voice tight. "The structural integrity—" "I saw her," he interrupted, still staring at the wall. "Saw who?" "A woman, not my mother. Someone older. She was here, singing." Hermione stepped closer, cautious. "I don't see anything. Are you sure it wasn't just—" "I'm not mad," he sapped, then quieter. "No, I'm not." She studied him, her brow softening. "What did she look like?" He told her, the dress, the braided hair, the smoke in her eyes. Hermione listened without interrupting, then reached into her coat and pulled down a small notebook. She flipped through pages of cramped script, muttering to herself. "Singing in a forgotten tongue," she murmured. "Smoke-filled eyes. Draco, this might be something the wards are preserving. Not a ghost, a residual imprint. Like a pensieve, but anchored to the house. To the ruins, to the magic beneath it. The foundation stones weren't just laid by your ancestors. They were star-bound, sealed with blood and incantation, long before wizards like us called this land ours." He looked back at the wall. The spiral seemed darker now, pulsing faintly in the lantern light. "She wasn't screaming," he said. "She was warning someone." Hermione went very still. "Warning?" he nodded. "I think she was trying to stop a fire." And then, from deep within the crumbling west wing, something answered, not in sound but in sensation. A low thrum, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The lantern flickered. Hermione grabbed his arm. "We need to go," she whispered, but Draco didn't move. The woman's voice returned, not in words, but in feeling. A name, half-remembered, buried under centuries. Star Alara. Star. The air and the wreckage of Malfoy Manor tasted of soot and old magic, a bitter aftertaste that clung to the back of Hermione's throat. Moonlight filtered through the skeletal remains of the east wing, casting long, jagged shadows across the scorched marble floor. She knelt beside what remained of a collapsed bookshelf, brushing charred fragments aside with gloved fingers. "You could at least pretend to be useful," Draco muttered, not looking up from the cracked locket in his palm. He turned it over with a frown, the silver dull and pitted by fire. "Or are you too busy cataloging ash?" Hermione exhaled sharply through her nose. "I'm mapping residual spell signatures. Something burned hot enough to melt stone, Draco. This wasn't an accident. And unless you've forgotten, I'm the only one here who can actually read the traces." He glanced at her, one pale eyebrow arched. "Oh, forgive me, Professor Granger. I forgot your expertise extends even to the ruins of my family's ancestral tomb." She ignored the jab, tapping her wand against a blackened floor tile. A faint blue shimmer blued beneath it, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. "There's something beneath the foundation. A ward, maybe. Older than the house itself." Draco crouched beside her, his sleeve brushing hers, just once, before he pulled back as if stung. "You're saying the fire didn't start here?" "No, I'm saying it was drawn here, like a beacon." She met his gaze. Someone lit it, or something. A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken history. The wind whispered through broken panes, carrying the scent of damp earth and bird cedar. Draco rubbed his thumb over the locket's hinge. "My mother kept this locked, never let anyone near it." Hermione studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, tired, haunted. "What's in it?" He hesitated. Then, with a flick of his wand, the locket clicked open. Inside, no portrait, no hair, just a scrap of parchment folded so tightly it looked like a seed. He unfolded it with careful fingers, a single word written in a looping hand. "Star, remember." "Star," Hermione's breath caught. "That's not your mother's writing." "No," he said softly. "It's not." They sat in silence for a long moment, the word hanging between them like a spell half-cast. Then Draco stood, brushing soot from his trousers. "You're right, the fire didn't start here, but it wasn't meant to destroy us. It was meant to wake something." She looked up at him. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen this before." He turned, eyes scanning the ruin. "When I was 10, the West Tower collapsed overnight. No warning, just gone. Father said it was structural, but the stones were worn for days. And the same word was carved into the foundation." "What word?" "Star, remember." Star. Hermione stood slowly, her pulse quickening. "That's not a message. It's a trigger." Draco's gaze darkened. "Then we're not the first ones looking." They began moving in tandem then, not by agreement but necessity. Hermione traced glyphs in the dust with her wand, muttering incantations under her breath. Draco paced the perimeter, testing the air with a slender silver rod he pulled from his inner coat. A family relic, she guessed, though he didn't explain. "You know," she said after a while, voice low, "you don't have to do this alone." He paused, rod hovering over a cracked flagstone. "I've been alone in this house, my whole life. Doesn't matter if you're here now." "No," she said, stepping closer, "but it matters that you're not." He didn't answer, but when the ground trembled faintly beneath them and a low hum rose from the earth, it was his hand, cold and steady, that found hers without looking. The air in the ruins of Malfoy Manor still carried the scent of burnt magic, acrid, metallic, like lightning trapped in stone. Hermione knelt in the soot, her fingers tracing the edge of a half-melted iron sigil, half-buried beneath what had once been the East Wing. The symbol was old, older than the Malfoy name, etched into Wisengamot records. Its lines were angular, deliberate, a language not spoken since the fall of the old northern coverns. "This isn't just protection magic," she murmured, brushing ash from the raised edges. "It's a binding." Draco stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his cloak pulled tight against the unnatural chill that clung to the grounds. "Binding what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lit the tip of her wand with a soft blue flame and held it over the sigil. The metal shimmered faintly, responding to the light. Runes along its circumference began to glow a dull crimson, pulsing once, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. "Guardians," she said at last. "Land-bound spirits. Not ghosts. Not house elves. Something older. The pure-blood families in the north used to bind them centuries ago. Warden spirits, tethered to ancestral lands through blood oaths, and iron sigils like this one." Draco's jaw tightened. "We didn't bind anything." "No," Hermione said, glancing up at him. "But someone before you did. And I think the fire didn't destroy the sigil, it woke it." A gust of wind swept through the wreckage, though the sky above remained still, heavy with unshed rain. The sigil pulsed again, stronger this time, and Hermione felt it, a low vibration in her bones, like distant drums beneath the soil. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a charred fragment of parchment she'd recovered from the library's remains. It was barely legible, but the ink had been preserved in places by a protective charm gone awry. "Look at this." Draco stepped forward, crouching beside her, despite the stain the ash would leave on his trousers. The parchment showed a family tree, but not the Malfoy line as recorded in the Ministry archives. This one stretched further back, into myth, perhaps, or madness. Names were written in a script that predated Latin, branching into symbols that looked disturbingly like the sigil beneath them. "That's not possible," Draco said. "That name, there's no record of a Malfoy bearing that title. Unless they were to Malfoy," Hermione replied. "Not by blood. I think your ancestors intermarried with one of the old northern bloodlines, the kind that dealt in earth magic and ward spirits. They buried it, Draco, covered it up, that the magic didn't forget." He stared at the parchment, then at the sigil. "And the fire?" "A rupture," she said. "The wards were dormant, maybe even decaying. But something triggered them. A spell, a bloodline revelation, a death." "My mother," he said quietly. Hermione looked at him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, gray and storm-lit, betrayed something raw beneath. "She was the last to stand in the ancestral chamber," he went on. "Before the flames," she said she felt watched. Hermione exhaled slowly. "The guardians respond to blood, to intent. If Narcissa was there, and the wards recognized her as kin, but sensed the line was in danger, they reacted," Draco finished. "They burned the house to protect it, or to wake it," Hermione whispered. A silence settled between them, broken only by the creak of shifting rubble in the distance. Then, from beneath the earth, a sound, low, resonant, like stone grinding against stone. The sigil flared once more, and this time the ground trembled. Hermione grabbed Draco's arm. "We need to go now." But as they turned, a shape began to rise from the ashes. A figure formed of smoke and shadow, its outline shifting, unfinished. It had no face, but it turned toward them, and in that gesture, recognition passed between the land and the last of its heirs. Draco didn't move. "It knows me. It knows your blood," Hermione corrected. "And it's waiting." The air at Malfoy Manor still tasted of burnt oak and old magic. Weeks after the fire, the scent clung to the soot-stained stones like a curse unwilling to lift. Hermione Granger knelt in what had once been the East Wing library, her fingers brushing over a fragment of charred parchment. It crumbled at her touch, releasing a puff of ash that curled upward, too slowly, as if reluctant to join the wind. Draco stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his posture rigid. He hadn't spoken in hours, not since the third time they'd seen it. "It's not possible," he said now, voice low, eyes fixed on the empty archway across the courtyard. "Smoke doesn't move like that." Hermione didn't look up. "Nothing here has been possible since we found the wards beneath the foundation." A breeze stirred through the ruins, lifting dust from the ground in lazy spirals. Then, just beyond the broken colonnade, the air thickened. Not with heat, not with smoke from some lingering ember. This was different. They coiled like ink in water, dark and deliberate, forming a shape that wavered between shadow and substance. Tall, humanoid, but wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "It's watching us," Hermione whispered. Draco drew his wand. "Stay behind me. I'm not helpless, Malfoy. You don't know what it is, and neither do you." The figure didn't advance. It simply stood. No, star-hovered star, in a space between two scorched yews, its form shifting like vapor, caught in a draft. Then, slowly, it raised one elongated arm and pointed directly at Hermione. She froze. A coldness spread across her chest, not from fear, but from recognition. "It knows me." "That's impossible," Draco snapped. "You've never been here before the fire." "No," she said softly, "but someone unconnected to might have." The creature lowered its arm. For a heartbeat, silence. Then it dissolved, not into nothing, but into tendrils that sank into the cracked earth, like roots. Hermione exhaled. "It's not attacking. It's waiting." "Waiting for what?" to finish what the fire started. She stood, brushing ash from her robes. I don't think the fire was meant to destroy. I think it was meant to wake something. Draco turned to her, gray eyes sharp. You're suggesting the fire was a ritual? I'm suggesting it didn't start on its own. The wards beneath the manor, they're older than the Malfoys. Older than Hogwarts, maybe. And they weren't just protective. They were star containment star. He looked back at the spot where the figure had been, and now the container is broken. The sudden gust swept through the courtyard, scattering loose stones. From the corner of her eye, Hermione caught movement, faint like a reflection in a tarnished mirror. She turned, but there was nothing, only the whisper of something brushing against the edge of hearing, like a voice speaking just below the threshold of sound. I felt it before, Draco said quietly, since I was a child, in the west corridor. At night, the walls would breathe. Mother said it was the house settling, but I knew better. Hermione looked at him, really looked, at the tension in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. This wasn't just about property or legacy. This was fear, real, unvarnished. Why come to me? She asked. He didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because you see things, even when no one else does. The wind died. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. Then, from deep beneath the ruins, so faint it might have been imagination, a single note, hummed through the stone, like a lullaby, sounding a language long forgotten. And somewhere, in the dark between the walls, something answered. Smoke still curled from the blackened stones of Malfoy Manor, like breath from a dying beast. The air tasted of soot and old magic, sharp with the tang of burnt ivy, and something deeper, something that hummed beneath the skin like a forgotten curse stirring awake. Hermione stood at the edge of the wreckage, her boots crunching on shattered marble, her cloak pulled tight against the morning chill. Behind her, Draco leaned against what remained of a column, arms crossed, face unreadable. His hair, usually slicked back with precision, hung loose and pale over his forehead, and there was a new weariness in the set of his shoulders. They had spent the night sifting through the ruins, uncovering fragments of spells etched into foundation stones, runes that pulsed faintly when touched. Hermione had recognized some ancient protective enchantments, older than the Malfoys, older than Hogwarts itself. But before they could decipher more, a sharp crack split the silence. Two figures in Navy ministry robes apparated into the courtyard, their insignias gleaming, magical law enforcement. Hermione stiffened. Draco didn't move, but his jaw tightened. Malfoy, said the taller of the two, a wiry wizard with a pinched face and sharp eyes. And Granger, I suppose it's convenient you're already here. Brogan, Draco replied, voice cool. To what do we owe the pleasure? Come to gawk at the family tragedy, or are you here to offer condolences? Save the sarcasm, Brogan snapped. The ministry is taking over this investigation, effective immediately. Hermione stepped forward. The fire's barely cold. What makes you think this is a matter for magical law enforcement? Brogan turned to her, his gaze sliding over her like oil. Because fires don't start themselves, Granger, and when they happen on the estate of a known Death Eater family, especially one with a history of covering up dark magic, we take interest. Draco pushed off the column. My parents are dead. The war's over. What more do you want? What we want, Brogan said, is the truth. The wards collapsed inward, something that doesn't happen by accident. Someone triggered them, or something. Hermione glanced at Draco. That much they hadn't told anyone. The wards hadn't failed. They'd been undone, disassembled from within, like a lock picked by a ghost. But saying that aloud would only deepen the suspicion. We've been cataloging magical residue, she said carefully. It's possible the fire was a result of residual enchantments destabilizing. The manor's ancient, older than your records show. Broban's partner, a younger witch with a tight bun, flipped open a parchment. We'll need access to all findings. And Malfoy, your wand will be examined. Standard procedure. Draco's laugh was low, bitter. You're joking. After everything, you still think I'm a threat. We think magic this old, this powerful, doesn't burn down houses without reason, the witch said. Then until we know what we're dealing with, everyone's a suspect. Hermione opened her mouth, but Draco cut in. Fine, take my wand. Search the rubble. But if you disturb anything marked with the red chalk, don't touch it. There are wards beneath the wards. Things even I don't understand." Robin frowned. "And you expect us to believe you're not hiding something?" "I expect you to stay alive," Draco said quietly. "That fire wasn't an accident. And whatever's still here, it doesn't like being watched." A silence fell, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. The wind shifted, and for a heartbeat, the ashes swirled into shapes, almost like letters, almost like names. Hermione looked at Draco. His gray eyes were fixed on the ground where the hearth had been, where something beneath the stone had pulsed once, just before dawn. She didn't tell the Ministry about that. Not yet. The air inside the ruins was thick with the scent of damp soot and something older, something metallic and sharp, like forgotten spells rusting in the dark. Draco stepped carefully over a collapsed beam, his boots leaving faint prints in the ash. Hermione followed, her wand raised, its soft blue light casting long shadows across the warped remains of what had once been the east wing. Her breath fogged in the cold. "This was never on any of the house plans," Draco said, voice low. "Not even in the family grimoires." They had been searching for 3 days, sifting through scorched tapestries and shattered glass, finding nothing but relics of a life he'd rather forget. But then, yesterday, a seam in the stone, hidden beneath a collapsed bookshelf, had shifted under his palm. A sigh of air, a whisper of pressure. A door. Hermione's finger brushed the stone now, tracing the edge of the threshold. "These aren't just concealed, they're sealed." Strongly, Draco exhaled, then placed his hand flat against the wall. "Malfoy," he said, the word rough in his throat. "Heir of the line." The stone trembled. Dust sifted from the ceiling as a low hum vibrated through the floor. The doorway groaned inward, revealing a narrow passage, its walls lined with faintly glowing sigils that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Hermione stepped forward first, light sweeping the walls. "These runes, they're not pure Parseltom. Not Malfoy. Not even entirely human." Draco frowned. "What do you mean, not human?" "Look," she said, crouching. "This one, the spiral with the broken circle, that's pre-Celtic, older than Hogwarts, possibly pre-Avalon. And this cluster here," she traced it in the air with her wand, "that's Sylvan script. The kind dryads used to bind oak spirits." He stared at her. "You're saying my ancestors were storing fairy trinkets?" "No," she said softly. "I'm saying they weren't the first ones here. This land, it remembers something older, and it's been waiting." They moved deeper. The passage opened into a circular chamber, its ceiling domed and cracked, moonlight seeping through fissures like liquid silver. Against the walls stood glass cases, some shattered, others intact, each housing an object that hummed with restrained power. A silver dagger with a blade like frozen breath, a mask of black wood, eyes hollow and too wide, a book bound in what looked like pale, hairless skin. Draco approached the center, where a pedestal stood, bare except for a single key, twisted iron, warm to the touch. "This is it," he said. "The inheritance key. My father told me once that only the true heir could open the vault beneath, that it tested you." "Tested how?" Hermione asked, stepping closer. "I don't know. He never passed it on. Said I wasn't ready. Or worthy." Draco's voice cracked, just slightly. She looked at him, really looked, seeing the weight in his shoulders, the ash still caught in his hair, the flicker of fear beneath his pride. "Maybe it's not about worth. Maybe it's about memory." He turned the key over in his palm. "You think I should try?" "I think," she said gently, "that whatever's down there, it's been waiting longer than your family's name has existed, and it chose now to reveal itself. That's not coincidence." A silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. Somewhere deep below, something shifted. A breath, a heartbeat in the stone. Draco closed his fingers around the key, and the floor fell away. The air inside what remained of the east wing tasted of char and old magic, thick enough to coat the back of Hermione's throat. She pulled her scarf higher, eyes scanning the warped beams and blackened stones that sagged like molten glass. Around them the ruins groaned softly, settling, perhaps, or something less natural. Draco stood a few paces ahead, silhouetted by the weak morning light filtering through the skeletal remains of the roof. He hadn't spoken since they apparated in, hadn't even looked at her. His hands were clenched at his sides, shoulders tight beneath the worn charcoal coat he'd thrown on without care. "It wasn't always like this," he said at last, voice low, as if speaking to the crumbling wall before him. "This part, it used to be the library." Hermione stepped closer, careful not to dislodge the fragile floor tiles beneath her boots. "The one with the restricted grimoires?" He gave a humorless half-smile. "Among other things. My mother used to read to me here. Before everything got heavier than stories." She hesitated, then asked softly, "What happened the night it burned?" "I don't know." He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch her eye. "One moment, I was in London. The next, the wards screamed. By the time I got back, half the house was gone. And the fire, Merlin's breath, it didn't behave like fire. It moved, like it was looking for something." His voice cracked on the last word, and Hermione felt something shift inside her chest. Not pity. Never that, but recognition. She knew what it was to carry the weight of a home that had failed you. She moved to a section of wall that still bore traces of gilded scrollwork beneath the soot. Pressing her palm flat, she murmured a detection charm. The stone shimmered faintly, revealing a sigil carved deep beneath the surface, a spiral within a serpent's coil. "Draco, look at this." He joined her, his breath catching. "That's not Malfoy." "I've never seen it before." "No," she said slowly. "It's older, predates your family's claim, I think. And it's tied to containment. Not protection. Containment." A silence stretched between them, brittle and full of unspoken questions. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the rubble, a low hum vibrated through the floor, like the tuning of some ancient instrument. Draco took a step back, his face gone pale. "It's still alive. Something is," she whispered. He turned away, pacing a few uneven steps before stopping beside a collapsed bookshelf. With a flick of his wand, he cleared the debris. Beneath it lay a small, scorched teddy bear, one button eye, missing, the other reflecting the dim light. Hermione's breath caught. "I was 8, he said quietly. "My father found it. Said soft things had no place in our house. He burned it in the drawing room. Or so I thought." She didn't move, didn't speak. She saw it then, not the boy who'd tormented her at school, but the child who'd learned early how to bury his fear beneath pride. "He never loved me," Draco said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not the way a father should. He loved the name, the blood, the power, but me, I was just the next vessel." Hermione took a slow breath. "You're not him, Draco." He laughed then, sharp and broken. "Aren't I? I stayed. I wore the mark. I stood silent when I should have." He cut himself off, jaw clenched. "When you should have what?" she asked gently. His silver eyes met hers, stormy and raw. "When I should have said no." The hum beneath the floor surged again, louder this time, pulsing like a heartbeat. Dust rained from the ceiling, but neither of them moved. The real fire, it seemed, wasn't in the ashes. It was in the remembering. The air in what remained of the east wing tasted like burnt parchment and old sorrow. Hermione crouched beside a charred beam, her fingers brushing the blackened wood, whispering a diagnostic charm under her breath. The ash responded weakly, swirling in a reluctant spiral before collapsing back into stillness. Draco stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his jaw tight as he watched the Ministry investigators poke through the wreckage, with wands drawn and expressions pinched with suspicion. "This wasn't fire," Hermione murmured, more to herself than anyone. "Not just fire." Draco didn't answer. He hadn't since they'd arrived. The manor was his inheritance, his shame, his ghost, and now it was a ruin that refused to stay quiet. A gust of wind howled through the skeletal remains of the manor, stirring the ash into lazy eddies. One of the investigators, a wiry man with round spectacles, knelt near the foundation stone, tracing the remnants of a warding room. "This symbol, Malfoy, do you recognize it?" Draco turned, his voice cool. "I'm not a vault of ancestral knowledge, Shaw. It predates your family's ownership," the man pressed. "We've seen similar markings near pre-war Celtic sites. Whatever was buried here, he never finished." The ash at his feet surged upward, like a serpent, uncoiling, forming a column that twisted into something vaguely humanoid, tall, featureless, its surface shifting like smoke over embers. It had no face, but Hermione felt its attention walk onto the investigator, like a predator scenting blood. "Shaw, back," another shouted. But it was too late. The figure lunged, not with hands, but with tendrils of soot that wrapped around Shaw's arm. He screamed, once, before his voice was swallowed by a sound like wind through a crypt. He wand clitus the ground, extinguished. The others raised their wands, shouting disarming spells, but the magic passed through the creature like mist through fingers. Hermione was already moving. "No spells," she shouted. "It's not corporeal. It's feeding on magical energy." Draco grabbed her arm. "Then what do you propose?" "We run." She twisted free, eyes fixed on the entity. "It's a guardian, bound. Look at the pattern in the ash. It's circling the foundation stone. It's not attacking at random. It's defending." Another investigator cast a blasting charm. The creature recoiled slightly, but the backlash of magic made it swell, its smoky body thickening, darkening. It flung Shaw aside like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, unconscious, his breath shallow. "Stop casting," Hermione snapped. "Every spell you throw at it only strengthens it." The remaining investigators hesitated, lowering their wands. The entity hovered, a column of restless shadow, pulsing like a heartbeat in the air. Draco stared at it, his face pale. "A guardian, bound to the land." "Not the land," Hermione said softly. "The wards. When a fire broke them, when the enchantments failed, it awakened. It's not evil. It's just following its purpose." "And what purpose is that?" he asked, voice low. "To protect what's buried beneath us." She stepped forward, slowly, hands open at her sides. "It only attacked when they probed the runes. It's responding to intrusion." Draco grabbed her shoulder. "Don't be an idiot, Granger." She didn't look at him. "It doesn't understand words, but it understands intent." She took another step. "I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to understand." The air grew colder. The ash swirls slowed. The entity tilted its head, if it had one, toward her. And then from the ground beneath her feet, a whisper rode, not in sound, but in sensation. A hum of ancient magic, a language older than the Malfoys, older than Hogwarts. Symbols glowed faintly in the dirt, pulsing once, like a slow blink. Hermione exhaled. "It's not just a guardian," she whispered. "It's a memory. And it remembers who broke its chains." The air inside what remained of the West Wing tasted of char and forgotten things. Hermione knelt on cracked flagstones, her fingers tracing the faint, pulsing lines of a ward sigil half scraped away by fire. The stone still hummed beneath her touch, not with power, but with memory, like the echo of a scream caught in the walls. "It's failing," she murmured, more to herself than to Draco, who stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his face unreadable in the gloom. "It was failing before the fire," he replied, voice low. "I didn't know, not really. I thought it was just weakening with time, like the house." Hermione glanced up. "These aren't just protective wards, Draco. They're containment. Layers upon layers, some of them older than Hogwarts. I'd wager. The fire didn't start this, it just tore the veil back." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, boots crunching over shattered glass and ash. He stopped beside her, looking down at the sigil. "You're certain it's alive?" "I'm certain something is, and it's not happy we're here." A cold draft slithered through the ruined corridor, though every window had long since been boarded. The torches they'd set flickered, their shadows stretching unnaturally long against the walls. Hermione felt it then, a pressure behind her eyes, a whisper below hearing. She clenched her jaw and pressed her palm flat to the stone. "We need to rebuild the network, not just patch it, reweave it. Before the next lunar tide, that's when the wards were always strongest and weakest." Draco exhaled sharply. "And you think we can do that? Together, you and I?" She looked at him then, really looked. The arrogance was still there, in the set of his jaw, but it was frayed now. Underneath, something else flickered. Fear, yes, but also a brittle kind of hope. "No," she said. "I think a star can do it, but I need access to your family's grimoires and the ancestral bloodline records. And you need to stop lying to me about what your father knew." His eyes darkened. "My father is in Azkaban, which makes you the last Malfoy," she countered. "Which means the wards respond to you. Without your blood, your intent, they'll unravel. no matter how perfectly I cast. Silence settled between them, thick as soot. Outside, the sky bruised toward twilight, and the ruins groaned like an old ship at sea. Finally, Draco turned and strode toward the crumbling archway. "Follow me." Hermione hesitated only a second before gathering her satchel and rising. She trailed him through the skeletal remains of the manor, past collapsed staircases and halls where portraits had burned themselves from their frames. The deeper they went, the colder it became, not just in temperature, but in feeling, as if the house itself recoiled from their presence. He stopped before a door so black it seemed to drink the torchlight. No handle, no keyhole. Just a silver serpent coiled around a rune Hermione didn't recognize. "This is where my mother kept the old books," Draco said. "Protected, not by wards, by oath." "Whose oath?" "Mine." He placed his palm against the serpent's head. "I swore never to open it, not without her permission." Hermione's breath caught. "And now?" He didn't look at her. "Now I'm breaking it." A hiss, soft as breath, and the door melted inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "I hope you're right about this," he said, voice tight. "Because if we're wrong, we're not just fixing a house. We're feeding something that's been waiting a very long time to wake up." She stepped forward, wand alight. "Then let's make sure we're not wrong." And together, they began the descent. The fire had left the library a skeleton of its former self. Charred beams jutted from the collapsed ceiling like broken ribs, and the scent of damp ash clung to every surface. Yet here they were, hunched over a salvaged oak table, surrounded by books pulled from hidden compartments beneath the rubble. Moonlight filtered through a cracked stained-glass window, painting fractured patterns across the pages. Crimson, sapphire, emerald, like ghosts of the Malfoy crest still whispering loyalty to a house that no longer stood. Hermione's fingers traced a line of runes in a crumbling grimoire, her brow furrowed. "This isn't just Parseltone," she murmured. "It's older, predating the Norman invasion, I'd wager. Some kind of proto-magic dialect, like the spells were meant to be star-felt star, not spoken." Draco didn't look up from the ledger he was deciphering. "My great-great-grandmother was rumored to have spoken to stones. They said she could make them weep blood during the famine of 23. Hermione glanced at him, surprised. "You believe that?" "I believe she star-thought star. She could," he said dryly. "And sometimes that's enough in magic." A silence settled, not uncomfortable, but thick with the weight of shared exhaustion. The candle between them flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls like watching spirits. Outside, the wind moaned through the broken arches of what had once been the east wing. "You never told me why you came to me," Hermione said after a while. "There are pure-blood historians, ancient magic experts. Why me?" Draco's quill stilled. He turned the page slowly, as if buying time. "Because you don't flinch," he said at last. "Not from the past, not from the name. You look at it all like it's just another puzzle to be solved. No sentiment, no fear." "Then Merlin knows sentiment is the last thing I need right now." She studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint smudge of soot beneath his eye. "And fear?" He exhaled, a short, bitter laugh. "I've had enough of that to last 10 lifetimes." Another pause. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of burnt rosewood, something Hermione remembered from her first visit to Malfoy Manor, years ago when the air had been thick with tension and unspoken threats. "You know," she said softly, "your mother once gave me a cup of tea in this room, right there by the fireplace. It was the day after the Battle of Hogwarts." Draco looked up, startled. "She never mentioned that. She didn't say much, just asked if I was cold." Hermione's voice softened. "I think she was thanking me for not letting them hand me over to Voldemort." Draco's fingers tightened around the quill. She never forgave herself for that night. She was under duress. "None of you had a choice." "I had choices," he said quietly. "I just didn't make the right ones." Hermione closed her book gently. "You're making them now." He met her gaze then, really mad. Gray eyes stripped of their usual armor, raw with something she couldn't name. Regret? Hope? It was too complex for a single word. Outside, an owl hooted, low and mournful. The candle dipped, sputtering, and in that fragile light the ruins seemed to breathe. "I used to hate this house," Draco said, almost to himself. He was all rules and blood and silence. But now that it's gone, I wonder if it was ever truly mine to hate, or if it was just waiting for someone to listen. Hermione reached out, not touching him, but placing her hand flat on the table, close enough that he could feel the warmth. "Then let's listen," she said, "until it tells us what it wants." And for the first time in years, Draco Malfoy didn't feel alone in the dark. The air beneath the ruins was thick with the scent of scorched stone and something older, damp earth, iron, and a faint metallic tang of spellwork gone stale. Hermione crouched low, her fingers brushing the fractured flagstone where the eastern wing had collapsed. A thin crack ran like a vein toward the edge of what used to be the garden, now a tangle of blackened hedges and broken marble. She traced it with her wand, murmuring a detection charm under her breath. The tip flared a soft, sickly green. "It's not residual," she said, voice tight with realization. "It's still active." Draco stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his cloak pulled tight against the creeping chill. His eyes scanned the ruin, not with grief. Hermione wasn't sure he was capable of that, but with something sharper. Suspicion. Calculation. Active how? The wards fell with the fire. Everyone knows that. "Not all of them," she said, standing. "This isn't standard Malfoy enchantment. It's older, much older. I've seen traces like this in texts about pre-wizarding land magics, birth-binding, blood-rooted. It's designed to draw power from the land itself." He scoffed, but there was no real force behind it. "You're saying our house was built on some ancient pagan ritual?" "I'm saying," she said, turning to face him, "that the wards didn't fail. They retreated, like roots pulling back into the soil." She pointed toward the orchard, where the ground dipped slightly into a shallow hollow. "They're still down there, alive." They made their way across the debris in silence, stepping over splintered beams and shattered glass. Hermione's boots crunched on something brittle, dragonbow china perhaps, from the formal dining room. Draco didn't flinch at the remnants. He moved like someone walking through a dream he'd spent years trying to forget. At the edge of the hollow, Hermione paused. The air here hummed, barely audible, like a plucked wire, buried deep underground. She knelt again and pressed her palm flat against the cold earth. A pulse shivered up her arm, slow, rhythmic like a heartbeat wrapped in iron. Draco went very still. "What the hell was that?" "It's connected," she whispered. "The fire didn't destroy the magic. It woke it up." He crouched beside her, reluctant, wary. "You're telling me there's something under my family's land that not only survived the inferno, but is, what, breathing?" "Not something," she said, eyes wide. "Some star, one star. Or at least, something that remembers being someone. These aren't just wards. They're anchored, bound to a consciousness, maybe a guardian, maybe a prisoner. Either way, it's tethered to the iron veins beneath the estate." He stared at her. "Iron," Three nodded. "Look." She scraped away a thin layer of ash and soil. Beneath, a dark, metallic lattice shimmered faintly, twisting, root-like strands of iron threaded through the earth, glowing with a dull, internal light. "It's not forged. It grew. Like a mine, but alive. These veins have been feeding the enchantments for centuries, maybe longer." Draco reached out, then hesitated. "If this was here all along, my father never mentioned it." "Would he?" Hermione asked softly. "Would any of them? This kind of power, this kind of secret. It wouldn't be something they'd leave lying around in the family grimoire." He didn't answer. Instead, he touched one of the iron strands. The moment his fingers made contact, the pulse surged. The ground trembled. The iron flared crimson, then dimmed. A voice. No, not a voice. A star-presence star. Brushed against their minds, cold and ancient, speaking in a language that wasn't heard, but star felt star, like roots cracking through stone. Hermione gasped, pulling her hand back. Draco snatched his away, his breath coming fast. What was that?" he whispered. Hermione stared at the pulsing veins beneath the earth, her voice barely audible. "It just recognized you." The air in the ruins of Malfoy Manor still carried the acrid tang of burnt magic, a scent like scorched parchment and bitter almonds that clung to the back of the throat. Hermione knelt in the ashen courtyard, her fingers brushing the cracked flagstones where the west wing once stood. The morning light, pale and hesitant, filtered through the skeletal remains of the manor's upper floors, casting long, jagged shadows across the debris. Draco stood a few paces behind her, arms crossed, his pale hair catching the dull glow. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour, not since she'd found the first sigil etched beneath the foundation stones. "This isn't just old magic," Hermione murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's older than the Malfoys, older than the house itself." He exhaled sharply. "That's impossible. The land's been ours for centuries." "Not star our star," she corrected, brushing soot from a crescent-shaped mark carved into the stone. "UK starred, taken star." "Look." She pointed to a series of interlocking runes spiraling outward from the central symbol. "This script, it's pre-Wizarding War, possibly even pre-medieval. It's a warding pact, not built, but star, bargained for star." Draco stepped closer, his boots crunching over broken glass. "A pact with whom? That's the question, isn't it?" She traced the edge of the sigil with her wand, whispering a quiet incantation. A faint blue light pulsed beneath the stone, then faded. "The magic here isn't just protective, it's sentient, and it's been dormant. Until now, a cold wind stirred through the ruins, lifting ash into slow spirals." Draco's jaw tightened. "You're saying my family didn't inherit this land, we stole it?" "No," Hermione said softly. "Worse, you broke the agreement. Look at the syntax here, the binding clauses. They're frayed. The vow was supposed to be mutual, protection in exchange for stewardship, respect, but the Malfoys stopped honoring it. Somewhere along the line you stopped seeing the land as alive. You treated it like property." He stared at the ground, his face unreadable. "And now the pact is failing. The magic is waking up," she said. "And it remembers. It knows the debt was never repaid." A low groan echoed beneath their feet, like stone shifting in its bones. Hermione flinched, stepping back. Draco didn't move. "I never asked for any of this," he said quietly. "I didn't choose their sins." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "But you're the only one left to answer for them." He looked away, toward what remained of the East Tower. "My mother used to say the house whispered at night. I thought she was just unwell, paranoid. But she heard it too, didn't she?" Hermione nodded. "The magic was stirring long before the fire. It's been trying to speak for years." Silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of centuries. Then Draco knelt, not gracefully, but with deliberate care, and placed his palm flat against the cold stone. "I don't know the old words," he said. "I don't know how to fix this, but if you can read the pact, teach me." She studied him, the tension in his shoulders, the rare vulnerability in his voice. Not pride, but something quieter, something like hope. "We'll need more than words," she said. "This kind of magic demands more than spells. It wants truth, acknowledgement." He closed his eyes. "Then give me the truth, all of it." Hermione took a breath. "Your ancestors didn't conquer this land. They bargained with the spirit bound to it. And when they broke their vow, the spirit didn't retaliate. It waited, and now it's asking for justice." The wind stilled. Even the ash hummed suspended in the air. Draco opened his eyes. "Then we'll give it justice. Not as Malfoys, but as people who finally understand what was lost." The air in the garden hung thick with the scent of ash and frost-bitten roses, their petals blackened at the edges, curling like old parchment. Hermione knelt beside a stone slab half buried beneath tangled roots and soot, her fingers brushing away damp earth. A faint hum vibrated beneath her fingertips, low and steady, like a heartbeat buried deep in the ground. "This one's different," she murmured, more to herself than to Draco, who stood a few paces behind, his breath visible in the brittle morning air. He didn't answer at first. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his long coat, shoulders hunched as if against more than just the cold. The manor loomed behind them, skeletal and scarred, its west wing collapsed into a heap of splintered beams and shattered glass. Smoke still curled from the rubble in lazy spirals, though the fire had died hours before dawn. Hermione traced the edge of the stone with her wand. Soft blue light flickered across its surface, revealing grooves etched into the granite, runic symbols worn but deliberate. They pulsed faintly, blue-white like distant stars. "Draco," she said, sharper this time. "Come look at this. He approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen gravel. His gaze dropped to the stone, and something flickered in his eyes, recognition maybe, or dread. "That's not Malfoy," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It's older, much older. These symbols, they're protective, but not in the way your family wards were. These aren't meant to keep people out. They're meant to keep something in." A wind stirred through the garden, lifting dead leaves in small spirals. One caught against the stone, then skittered away. The runes dimmed. Hermione exhaled. "There are more. I've found 3 already, all along the perimeter. They form a rough circle, enclosing the house, the orchard, even the old well. This wasn't just a ward. It was a boundary." Draco crouched beside her, brushing aside a tangle of thorny stems. Beneath, another stone emerged, its surface cracked but still legible. The rune glowed faintly at his touch. "It's warm," he said, pulling back slightly. "Magic residue," Hermione said, though her voice betrayed a waver. "But not residual, active. Whatever this is, it's still working." They looked at each other then, the silence between them charged. The weight of the house pressed down, not just its physical ruin, but the history, the blood, the things never spoken aloud. Hermione had read the accounts, the whispered rumors. The Malfoys had always been rich, always powerful, but never questioned how. Now, in the scorched earth of their garden, she wondered if power had ever been theirs to claim, or if they'd merely been custodians of something far older, far hungrier. "Your family never mentioned this?" she asked. Draco shook his head, not meeting her eyes. "We didn't come to the gardens. Not after. After my father began sealing the east gate, said it was unsafe." "Unsafe from what?" "I was 12. I didn't ask." She studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar above his brow, from a duel she'd read about in the Prophet. He looked tired, not just from the night but from years of carrying something unseen. "We should mark them," she said, standing. "Map the stones. See if we can find the center of the circle." "And if we do?" he asked, rising with her. She hesitated. "Then we find out what's been sleeping under your roses." A single winter rose, half charred, trembled in the wind. Beneath it the runes flared once, soft, insistent, before fading into stone. The air above the ruins of Malfoy Manor shimmered like a mirage in the summer heat, but it wasn't the sun causing the distortion. It was magic, old, restless, and angry. Hermione stood at the edge of the scorched garden path, her fingers clenched around her wand, eyes scanning the cracked marble steps where shadows seemed to gather unnaturally. Behind her, 2 Ministry Recovery wizards in navy robes prodded the rubble with detection rods, muttering about residual curses and structural instability. "It's not residual," Draco said low, stepping up beside her. His voice was tight, jaw clenched. "It's still here. Something's still here." Hermione didn't answer. She felt it too, a pressure beneath her skin, as though the earth itself were breathing. The runes they'd uncovered yesterday beneath the foundation stones pulsed in her memory, etched in ash and written in a dialect even her research hadn't fully deciphered. Guardians of the Hearth, the scroll had called them. Not wards, not spells. Beings. A sharp cry cut through the humid morning. One of the ministry workers stumbled back, his detection rod blackened and smoking. "Something's moving under the west wing," he shouted, voice cracking. "I felt—" He didn't finish. The ground split open with a sound like tearing silk. A wave of heat blasted outward, hurling debris and dust into the air. Hermione threw up a shield charm just in time. Stone shards peppered the transparent barrier like rain. Through the haze a figure rose. It was tall, nearly 9 feet, woven from ash and embers, its body shifting like smoke held in shape by sheer will. Glowing fissures ran across its form, pulsing with a deep orange light. Where a face should have been, 2 pits burned, like dying coals, eyes that saw too much, too deeply. "The Ash Guardian," Hermione whispered. It turned its head, slow, deliberate, toward the nearest wizard. He raised his wand, stupefy. The spell struck the creature's chest and dissipated like mist. The Guardian raised a hand. Fire erupted. Not flame from a wand, but raw, consuming heat that ripped from its palm in a wave. The wizard screamed, flailing as his robes ignited, but Draco was already moving. Pertigo totalum, he barked, the shield springing to life a second too late. The man collapsed, rolling on the ground, his arm blistered and smoking. Hermione, Draco shouted. It recognizes intruders. Not us. Them. She understood. The Guardian wasn't attacking blindly. It was defending, and the Ministry workers were outsiders. Fall back, she yelled, stepping forward instead. Drop your wands, all of you. Now. The second wizard hesitated. The Guardian turned. Do it, Draco roared. The man dropped his wand. Hermione raised her hands, palms out, wand tucked into her sleeve. We mean no harm, she said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her knees. We're not here to take anything. We're here to understand. The Guardian paused. The heat lessened, just slightly. The glow in its chest flickered, like a pulse slowing. Draco stepped beside her, breathing hard. It's bound to the house, he said quietly. To the bloodline. But it's been asleep so long. It doesn't know friend from foe. It knows you, Hermione said. It didn't attack you first. Maybe not, he said. But I'm still a Malfoy. That means something to it. She looked at him, really looked. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by fire and fear. In its place was something raw, something honest. Guilt, responsibility. The Guardian lowered its arms, the embers dimmed. Hermione exhaled slowly. It's listening, for now, Draco said. But if they come back with more people, more spells, it'll burn them all. They stood together in the silence that followed, the ruins breathing around them, the past still awake beneath their feet. The fire had long since burned itself out, leaving behind only a skeleton of what Malfoy Manor had once been, charred beams jutting like broken ribs into the overcast sky, the air still thick with the scent of damp soot and something older, something deeper like wet stone and forgotten breath. Hermione knelt beside a collapsed section of the west wing, brushing ash from what might have been a book binding, now just pulped parchment and scorched leather. Her fingers trembled slightly, whether from cold or the residual magic humming beneath the rubble. She wasn't sure. Draco stood a few paces away, his back to her, shoulders rigid beneath the black wool of his coat. He hadn't spoken in over an hour, not since they'd uncovered the first of the hidden wards beneath the foundation stones, wards that pulsed faintly, even in ruin, like a heart refusing to stop. Hermione looked up. There's writing here, she said, voice soft but clear in the hush. It's in a dialect I've never seen, maybe older than Middle English, maybe pre-wizarding altogether. He didn't turn. It's Old Saxon, he said, with blood runes woven through the vowels. My grandfather used to recite them during the winter solstice. Said they kept the house aware. She paused, her fingers hovering over the fragile page. Aware of what? Draco exhaled, a slow mist curling from his lips. Of us, of who walked its halls, who died in them. A silence settled, heavy and unbroken by birdsong or wind. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Then, without warning, he said, I used to hate this place. Hermione looked at him, startled. He still faced away, but his voice had changed, softer, stripped of its usual edge. I hated it long before the Dark Lord came, before the war, before everything. He turned then, just enough for her to see the profile of his face, pale and drawn in the grey light. It wasn't a home, it was a performance. Every corridor, every portrait, every damn candlestick was watching, judging, waiting for me to fail. She said nothing, just listened. My father would walk these halls at night, reciting lineage like a prayer. The Malfoys have stood here since the conquest, he'd say. We do not bend, we do not break. Draco's voice dropped, almost a whisper. But I wanted to run, to burn it all down myself. Hermione swallowed. And now that it's gone, he let out a breath, half laugh, half sob. Now that it's gone, I feel lighter, and guilty for feeling it, like I should mourn a prison just because it had my name on it. She stood, brushing ash from her knees, and stepped closer. You're not responsible for what it was, or what it made you do. His eyes flicked to hers then, silver, clouded with something raw. Aren't I? I lived in it. I believed in it. I wore the mark. Hermione. I stood in that dining room and watched people tortured because I was too afraid to say no. You were 17, she said gently. Afraid doesn't excuse everything, but it explains a great deal. He looked away again toward the blackened shell of the East Tower. I used to dream about escaping, not to some grand place, just somewhere small. A cottage, maybe near the sea. No portraits, no heirlooms, no ancestors whispering in the walls. Just quiet. She almost smiled. That sounds peaceful. It sounds impossible, he said. This blood, this name, it clings. Even in ashes, it's still here. I can feel it. She reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his arm. Just for a moment, maybe the house is gone, but you're not. And whatever's still alive in these ruins, it doesn't have to define you. He closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know who I am without it. And for the first time, Hermione didn't see a Malfoy. She saw a boy who had never been allowed to grow up, and she wondered if redemption could begin not with grand acts, but with silence, with ash, with a single confession spoken into the wreckage of everything he'd ever known. The air beneath the ruins of Malfoy Manor tasted of ash and iron, thick enough to coat the back of Hermione's throat. She crouched low, her fingers brushing cracked stone as a cold draft snaked through the fissure beneath what had once been the east wing. Above, the sky brooded, clouds the color of old bruises, heavy with unshed rain. Draco stood a few paces behind, his arms crossed, his breath shallow. He hadn't spoken since they'd found the hidden stairwell, its entrance exposed only after the fire had melted a centuries-old ward. This wasn't in any family record, he muttered more to himself than to her. Hermione glanced back, her wand casting a steady blue glow that flickered against the damp walls. No, because someone didn't want it found. They descended slowly, each step groaning under their weight. The air grew colder, sharper, and the scent of burnt magic prickled at her skin, like ozone after lightning, but darker, older. The stones here were carved with symbols she didn't recognize, angular runes that pulsed faintly when her light passed over them. She paused, tracing one with the tip of her wand. These aren't Malfoy, she said. Draco stepped closer, his voice tight. No, they're older. Pre-Saxon, maybe. My father once mentioned something about a ward older than the house. He called it a chain beneath the hearth. I thought it was just one of his morbid fancies. It wasn't. She moved forward, the glow revealing a narrow corridor that sloped downward. The walls were lined with stones fused together by a kind of spellwork. No mortar, no chisel marks, just seamless, ancient binding. Then the floor changed. They stepped into a circular chamber, its domed ceiling lost in shadow. In the center lay a broken stone, roughly the size of a human heart, shattered down the middle, jagged lines webbed outward from it across the floor, as if something had cracked from within. Hermione knelt, careful not to touch it. This was the keystone. Draco went very still. The what? The anchor. The core of the protective enchantment. Everything above, every ward, every alarm, every illusion, it was all tied to this. But it's been broken, deliberately. He crouched beside her, his face pale in the dim light. That's impossible. The wards renew themselves. They're self-sustaining. Not if the source is corrupted. She pointed to the fracture. See how the edges are blackened? That's not fire damage. That's decay. Magical rot. Something poisoned it from the inside. A silence settled between them, thick and uneasy. Outside, thunder rumbled, distant but growing. Draco reached out, then pulled back. My mother used to say the house watched over us, not in a metaphorical way. She meant it literally. Said the walls remembered. I thought she was grieving. After the war, Hermione studied the runes etched into the stone around the keystone. It wasn't just protection. This was a pact. A binding between the builders and something else. A guardian. Not a house elf. Not a golem. Something older. Something that required loyalty to hold it. And now the keystone's broken, Draco whispered, so the guardian is no longer bound. She looked up at him. And if it was loyal only because of this stone, then it might not be loyal anymore. A low vibration hummed through the floor, subtle but unmistakable. The fractured lines in the stone pulsed once, faintly red. Draco stood abruptly. We need to go, Hermione didn't argue. She rose, backing away, but as she turned, a whisper brushed against her mind, not in any language, but in sensation. Cold, familiar, like a name she'd almost forgotten. She froze. Draco, did you hear that? He was already at the entrance, his hand on the wall. Hear what? She didn't answer. The whisper came again, softer this time, curling around her thoughts like smoke. Then deep in the crack of the keystone, something shifted. Not movement, not sound, but presence. Something was waking up. The morning light cut through the ministry's stained glass in fractured streaks, painting the chamber floor in hues of crimson and gold, colors that once stood for valor, now twisted into something more like accusation. Draco sat in the front row, spine rigid, hands folded tightly in his lap. The air smelled of old parchment, candle wax, and the faint metallic tang of brewing tension. Around him, robes rustled with deliberate disapproval. He kept his gaze fixed on the circular dais where the High Council presided, refusing to look at the portraits lining the walls, eyes that had judged Malfoys for generations. "The Malfoy estate," intoned Councilwoman Greengrass, her voice cool and precise, "has been deemed a threat to magical stability. The uncontrolled inferno that consumed the manor was not accidental. Preliminary investigations suggest ancient wards, dark, volatile magic, reactivated without provocation. The land itself may be corrupted." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Draco's jaw tightened. "Corrupted," came a voice from the left. Amelia Bones, sharp-featured and unflinching. "Or awakened. There is no evidence of dark intent. The wards predate the Malfoy ownership by centuries. To punish a family for what their ancestors merely inherited, that sets a dangerous precedent." Draco exhaled, barely allowing himself to feel the flicker of gratitude. But it was short-lived. "Precedent?" Greengrass countered. "We are not here to debate history. We are here to protect the public. That land has seen generations of Death Eater activity. Lucius Malfoy's crimes are well documented. Shall we now excuse the son for the sins of the father, simply because flames rose in the night?" Draco's fingers curled into his palms. He didn't speak, he had been advised not to. His presence was required, but his voice, they said, would only inflame. Still, the weight of her words pressed against his ribs like a blade. "It is not about excusing," Bones replied, "but assessing. The ministry has already seized dozens of properties under the post-war purges. Is this another act of retribution, or are we truly investigating?" A hush fell. Even the scribes paused mid-sentence. Then, from the center seat, Thaddeus Knott, once an ally, now a man with ambitions too large for old loyalties, cleared his throat. "The question before this council is not guilt, but safety. The land is unstable, magical residue lingers. Until we understand what caused the fire, what sleeps beneath those ashes, we cannot allow private ownership to continue. I propose the estate be placed under ministry custodianship, pending full investigation." Draco closed his eyes. That was the real blow. Not confiscation, not imprisonment, custodianship. A polite word for theft. The manor was already gone. Now they would take the land, the name, the last thread tying him to something that had once been more than shame. He thought of the scorched garden where his mother used to walk, the hidden library behind the east wing, the silver serpent knocker that had fallen into the earth like a dying whisper. He thought of the thing they'd found in the ashes, pale roots coiling like veins, pulsing faintly beneath the rubble. Hermione had stared at it, not with fear, but with awe. "This isn't dark magic," she whispered. "It's older. It's alive." But no one here cared about what was alive. They only saw a Malfoy and a ruin. A vote was called. Hands rose like vultures circling. Draco did not watch. He stared at the floor, at the fractured light now pooling near his boots, and imagined the roots beneath the earth, waiting, humming, remembering. When the verdict was read, he stood slowly, the weight of centuries pressing down. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and something else, something faintly sweet, like burnt rosemary and old stone. He walked out without a word. And deep beneath the ruins of Malfoy Manor something stirred. The ministry hearing chamber was colder than it had any right to be, the stone floor leaching warmth from Hermione's boots as she stood before the panel of senior Aurors and Oversight Council members. Rain lashed against the high enchanted windows, each drop echoing like a whispered accusation. At her side, Draco sat stiffly in a chair that looked too small for him, his pale fingers knotted together, eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't spoken since they'd entered. Not a word, not even when Kingsley Shacklebolt had warned her to reconsider her stance. "You understand, Miss Granger," said Councilwoman Thorne, her voice sharp with impatience, "that Mr. Malfoy is under active investigation. The fire at Malfoy Manor, conveniently destroying records, one might say, occurred only days after a classified ledger from the Department of Magical Lineages went missing, and now you, of all people, are requesting full access to the ruins. On his behalf." Hermione straightened. "I'm not requesting it on his behalf. I'm requesting it in the interest of magical preservation and public safety." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Aurora Dawlish leaned forward. "Preservation. The place is a pile of ash and cursed timber. Anything useful is gone." "Not gone," Hermione said, calm despite the tremor in her chest. "Transformed. The enchantments beneath Malfoy Manor. They're older than the family, older than the ministry itself, I suspect. I've seen the residual magic in the soil samples. It's not just protective wards, it's something else. Something dormant." Draco lifted his gaze then, just slightly, silver eyes flickering toward her. She didn't look at him. "And you believe Mr. Malfoy can help uncover this?" Thorn asked, skepticism dripping from every syllable. "I believe the investigation will fail without him," Hermione said. "The magic there, it responds to bloodline. I've tested non-Malfoy probes, charms, spectral sensors, even a borrowed phoenix feather. Nothing penetrates deeper than the foundation stones." But when Draco stepped onto the grounds, the runes beneath the rubble lit up. They recognized him. "That could be a trap," said another Aurora. "A lure. The manor has always favored its heirs, even the unworthy." "Then let it lure," Hermione said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the doubt. "Let us walk into it with eyes open. I've spent weeks studying the fragments, burnt scrolls, broken sigils, even the pattern of the fire itself. It wasn't accidental. It was a ritual. Someone, or something, wanted the surface cleared. But they didn't destroy everything, they awakened it." Silence followed. Even the rain seemed to pause. Draco finally spoke, low and rough. "She's right. I felt it too. When I stood in what was left of the East Wing, it wasn't grief I felt. It was a pull, like something calling my name in a language I've never heard, but somehow know." Thorn studied them both, her expression unreadable. "You're asking us to trust a Malfoy with an active investigation into potential warlock treason, and you, Miss Granger, are staking your reputation on it." Hermione met her gaze. "I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for permission to prevent a greater disaster. If we don't go back, if we seal the site and walk away, whatever is buried there will grow stronger. I've read the old texts. Places like this, they don't stay quiet forever. They wait, and when they wake, they take more than bones." The council exchanged glances. Kingsley, seated at the far end, gave the slightest nod. Thorn exhaled. "Very well. You will return to the site under ministry supervision. 2 Aurors will accompany you at all times. And Mr. Malfoy—" "Yes," Draco said, voice tight. "If this is a ploy, it's not," Hermione said before he could answer. "That if you're looking for betrayal, look to the shadows beneath the manor, not the man beside me." Draco turned fully to her then, surprise and something softer in his eyes. She finally looked back, and in that quiet moment, beneath the weight of history and suspicion, something shifted, not just in the room, but between them. The air in the ruins of Malfoy Manor tasted of soot and old stone, thick with the memory of fire, and something older, something that hummed beneath the floor like a pulse. Hermione knelt in the center of what had once been the East drawing room, her fingers tracing the faint grooves in the marble where the ancestral wards had been carved. The lines were blurred now, half melted, but the magic hadn't died. It lingered, restless, like breath caught in a throat. Draco stood at the edge of the circle they'd drawn in chalk and powdered moonstone, his pale hands clenched at his sides. He didn't look at her. He hadn't, since they found the sigil beneath the collapsed staircase, pulsing faintly, alive despite everything. "It shouldn't still be here," he said, voice low. "The fire should have destroyed it." "It didn't," Hermione replied, not looking up. "Fire purifies, but it doesn't erase magic this old. This binding, it predates her family by centuries, Draco. This isn't just a protection charm. It's a covenant. A covenant with what?" She hesitated. The word had come to her in fragments, in dreams the last 3 nights. whispers in a language that wasn't Latin or Aramaic, but something older, rougher. She'd spent hours in the restricted archives at Hogwarts, then in the hidden stacks beneath the Ministry's Department of Mysteries. The records were sparse, half erased, as if someone had wanted it forgotten. A guardian, she said. Not a construct, not a golem or a wraith. A being, trapped, bound to protect the bloodline. But when the house burned, the ritual fractured. The guardian is unmoored. It's not free, but it's not bound either. That's why the wards are failing. That's why the stones still whisper at night. Draco exhaled sharply. And you think we can fix it? I think we have to try. If the bond collapses completely, the magic could unravel outward. It could take half the valley with it. He turned to her then, gray eyes shadowed. And if we rebind it, what happens to it? To whatever's trapped in there? Hermione met his gaze. It goes back to sleep. It waits, as it has for hundreds of years. And if it doesn't want to? The question hung between them. Heavy. She didn't have an answer. They had gathered the components, a lock of hair from the last living Malfoy heir, Draco's, cut at dawn with a silver knife, a vial of earth from beneath the ancestral crypt, a drop of blood from each of them, not for the ritual, but for the truth. The magic required honesty, or it would turn on them. And the sigil, painstakingly redrawn in mercury and ash, each line humming when touched. They stood opposite each other now, within the circle, the air growing thick and slow, as if time itself were holding its breath. Say the words, Draco said. She opened the ancient grimoire, its pages brittle, its script glowing faintly under candlelight. The incantation was a series of guttural syllables, each one pulling at her tongue like a living thing. She began, at first, nothing. Then the ground trembled. A low moan rose from beneath the stones, not in pain but in recognition. The sigil ignited in blue flame, cold and soundless. Draco flinched but held his ground. Wind howled through the broken roof, though there had been no storm all night. Shadows pooled in the corners, thickening, coiling. Something was rising. Hermione's voice grew stronger, more certain. The magic responded, not to power, but to intent. She wasn't commanding, she was asking. The flames shifted, forming a shape, tall, indistinct, wise like cracked obsidian. It did not speak, but she felt its question all the same. Star, why do you bind me again? Star. She looked at Draco. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. He gave a single nod. We're not binding you to serve, she said, her voice clear now, in English, so it would understand. We're asking you to rest. To protect no longer, but if you choose to stay, we will remember your name. Silence. Then, a breath like stone turning over. The fire dimmed, the shape bowed its head, and the sigil sealed itself in silver light. The air below the manor was thick and ancient, the kind that pressed against the skin like damp silk. Hermione cast Star Lumos Star, and the wand light flickered weakly, as if the dark itself resisted illumination. Stone steps, slick with moss, and something older, something that smelled faintly of iron and burnt herbs, led downward, spiraling into the earth, beneath what had once been the west wing. Draco followed a few paces behind, his sleeve pulled over his hand, as he brushed aside a cobweb that clung like lace to the archway. This wasn't on any of the family blueprints, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Hermione paused, crouching to run her fingers along the wall. The stone wasn't dressed, it was raw, almost organic in its unevenness, as though it had been pulled from the earth, rather than quarried. These aren't Malfoy wards. They're older. Much older. What do you mean, older? She traced a groove in a wall, a series of angular symbols carved in a language that made her temples throb. This is pre-Wizarding Confederation, possibly older than Hogwarts. These aren't just protective spells, they're bindings. Draco exhaled sharply. Bindings for what? She didn't answer. The light from her wand trembled as it passed over the floor, where a circle had been etched into the stone. At its center the rock was cracked, as though something had tried to push its way out. A low hum vibrated beneath their feet, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. We shouldn't be here, Draco said, his voice low. Not fearful, Never that, but wary, like a man who had learned too late that some door should stay closed. Hermione stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "You're right, we shouldn't, but we are. And now that we know the fire didn't start on its own, now that we know something broke through, ignorance isn't an option." She stepped into the circle. "Granger, wait." She closed her eyes, murmuring under her breath, weaving a diagnostic charm that shimmered in the air like silver thread. The symbols on the walls pulsed faintly in response. Then, one by one, they flared, deep crimson, then black, then a sickly green that made Draco stagger back. The hum deepened into a groan. Hermione's eyes snapped open. "It's not dormant, it's waiting." "What is?" "I don't know, but it remembers the Malfoys. These wards, they weren't meant to keep things out. They were meant to keep something in. And your family, they weren't the first to guard it. They were just the last." A breath of cold air coiled through the tunnel, carrying with it the scent of wet soil, and something else, something metallic and alive. The wall seemed to contract, just slightly, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Draco stepped forward, jaw tight. "Then why leave us the key?" Hermione turned to him. "Maybe they didn't. Maybe it let us in." Silence fell, brittle and sharp. Then, from deeper in the tunnel, a sound, slow, deliberate, stone grating against stone. Hermione raised her wand. Draco drew his, though it trembled in his hand. The light flickered, and something in the dark answered. The air in the remains of the east wing tasted of old fire and older stone. Ash still clung to the corners of the shattered windowsills, swirling in faint eddies whenever the wind remembered to breathe. Hermione crouched beside a cracked flagstone, her fingers brushing the cold surface where a sigil had been etched, nearly invisible now, worn down by centuries, yet humming faintly under her touch. Draco stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his face unreadable in the gray light. "This wasn't here in the records," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Nothing in the Black family archives, nothing in the old Wisengamot land registries. This predates the Malfoys." "No," he said quietly, "it doesn't. It predates us all." She looked up. His eyes were fixed on the stone, not with disdain, but with something closer to dread. Then the ground trembled, not violently but enough to make her pull her hand back. The low chime resonated through the ruin, like a bell struck beneath the earth. The sigil flared, a pulse of silver-blue light crawling outward in delicate veins across the floor. The air thickened, shivering like heat over stone. "Hermione, move," Draco said, but it was too late. The world folded. They stood in a forest, vast and primeval, where trees taller than Hogwarts scraped a twilight sky. Moonlight dripped through the canopy in silver strands, illuminating moss-covered roots that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. The air smelled of damp earth and something sharper, ozone, or magic in its rawest form. Before them, two figures faced each other beneath an ancient yew. One was robed in dark green, face hidden by a hood, hands outstretched over a shallow pool of mercury that floated above the ground. The other was no man at all, tall, slender, with skin like birch bark and eyes that glowed like ember coals. Its hair was woven from ivy and shadow. "The pact is not of ownership," the guardian spoke, voice like wind through reeds. "It is of balance. You seek shelter, magic, power. But the land demands reciprocity." The robed figure bowed. "We offer blood, memory, and silence. One heir each generation to walk the veil. One vow never to spill blood upon this soil in malice, and one secret buried deep. Never spoken, never broken." The guardian reached into the pool. The mercury split, revealing a core of white fire. "So long as the pact holds, the land will shelter you. So long as you honor it, the enchantments will endure. But break it, by greed, by violence, by forgetting, and the house will remember. It will turn." They clasped hands. Where their skin met, roots burst from the earth, spiraling upward, forming walls, arches, the first bones of a memory that had not yet been dreamed. Hermione could feel the magic in her bones, not as a spell, but as a memory. Something she had always known and just now recalled. Draco stood rigid beside her, his breath shallow. The vision shifted. Now the manor stood complete, but changed, twisted. The towers leaned like broken teeth. The trees around it were blackened. A figure in a Malfoy crest lay sprawled on the steps, throat slit. Another, younger, stood over him, face contorted with rage, knife in hand. The pact was broken, the the guardian whispered from nowhere and everywhere. Blood spilled in malice. A son killed his sire for inheritance. The house wept. The manor groaned in the vision. Stones cracking, windows bleeding dark smoke. The enchantments turned inward, festering. The land no longer protected. It punished. And then, silence. They were back in the ruin. The sigil had gone dark. Hermione gasped, her hands trembling. Draco didn't move. His face was pale. "That was Arcturus Malfoy," he said. "My great-great-grandfather's brother. He disappeared. They said he fled to France." "No," Hermione said softly. "He killed his brother, and the house remembered." Draco turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. All these years, the whispers in the walls, the portraits that watch too closely, the way the staircases shift when someone lies, it's not just magic, it's vengeance. She touched his arm just once. "It's not too late, the pact can be renewed, but not with blood, with truth." He looked at her, really looked, at the soot on her cheek, the fire in her eyes, the hand still resting against his sleeve, and for the first time, Draco Malfoy didn't pull away. The air in the remains of the east wing hung thick with the scent of burnt oak, and something older, damp earth, iron, and the faint ozone tang of unraveling magic. Hermione knelt beside a cracked marble plinth, her fingers tracing the grooves of a sigil that pulsed faintly beneath the ash. It wasn't in any of the standard grimoires. Not Slytherin, not even quite Elder Futhark. It was older, forgotten. Draco stood a few paces behind, his sleeves rolled up, face smudged with soot. He hadn't slept since the fire. "It's still watching," he said quietly. Hermione didn't look up. "I know." A breath of wings stirred where there should have been none. The broken chandelier above them trembled, though no draught touched it. Then the flames came, not red or orange, but a cold, silvery fire that climbed the walls like ivy, silent and deliberate. It didn't burn the stone. It burned memory. The floor beneath them shimmered, and suddenly they weren't in ruins anymore. They stood in a grand hall, untouched by time. Tapestries depicting serpents coiled around ancient trees hung from vaulted ceilings. A woman in robes of deep forest green stood at the head of the room, her hair braided with silver thread, her eyes the same pale gray as Draco's, but filled with sorrow, not pride. "This was not built for pride," she said, her voice echoing from everywhere. "And nowhere. It was built as a ward, a shield. And you, your blood, have used it only for power." Draco took a step forward, his jaw tight. You didn't know," the woman interrupted, her voice sharpening. "None of you ever did. Generation after generation, whispering of purity, warding secrets, blind to the truth buried beneath your feet." Hermione rose slowly. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze shifted to her. "I am the last voice of the Veilwardens. The keepers before the name Malfoy ever stained these stones. We bound ourselves to this place, not as masters, but as guardians." The vision shifted again. They saw the foundation laid not by wizards in opulent robes, but by a circle of 7, hands joined, backs bent with effort. The land itself had answered their call. Trees uprooted to make way, rivers diverted, not with domination, but with plea. And then came the Malfoys. The scene darkened. The family arrived centuries later, cloaked in ambition. They found the wards intact. The magic ripe for exploitation. They bent it, twisted it, turned protection into concealment, sanctuary into vault. The silver fire pulsed, and Draco staggered as if struck. Images flooded his mind, his father locking the cellar door, Bellatrix's laughter in the drawing room, the weight of the dark mark on his arm. Not just his choices, the weight of every choice that came before. "You carry their blood," the voice whispered, "but do you carry their heart?" "I don't want their legacy," Draco said, voice raw. "I never did." "Then prove it." The floor cracked open. From below rose a column of that same spectral flame, twisting into a shifting figure, tall, faceless, cloaked in ash and ember. It extended a hand, not toward Hermione, but toward Draco. In its palm, a single silver key hovered, glowing faintly. "This key opens the lowest vault," the entity intoned. "Where your ancestors locked away what they feared, our oath, our magic, our truth. Open it, and the house will judge you. Refuse, and it will burn again. And this time, she will not survive." Hermione's breath caught. Draco turned to her, his eyes wide with something she hadn't seen before. Fear, yes, but also resolve. "You don't have to do this," she said. "No," he replied, stepping forward. "But if this house is going to live, or die, it won't be because I ran from it." He reached for the key. The moment his fingers brushed it, the fire roared, not at him, but around him, forming a spiral that reached into the broken sky. And from the ashes, a sound began, soft at first, then swelling. A lament, old, wordless, full of grief and something like hope. The house was singing. The air tasted of birch sugar and iron, thick with the residue of broken spells, and something older, something that hummed beneath the soles of Hermione's boots like a tracked heartbeat. The remains of Malfoy Manor groaned around them, stone cracking, as if the bones of the house remembered pain. Draco stood beside her, wand raised, face pale but set, his breath shallow as he traced a trembling line of light through the dark. "It's not just collapsing," he said, voice low. "It's fighting us." Hermione nodded, pressing her palm against the nearest wall. The stone flinched beneath her touch, pulsing with erratic magic. "The wards are sentient. They've been corrupted, twisted by whatever's been feeding on them. But they recognize blood. Your blood." He flinched, though she hadn't meant to wound. "I didn't even know they went this deep. My father always said the foundations were strong. But this is older than the Malfoys." "Older than wizarding families," she murmured, eyes scanning the fractured sigils glowing faintly in the rubble. "These symbols, they're pre-English. Maybe Celtic, or older. Someone built this place on something sacred, and then buried it." A low shudder rolled through the ground. From the blackened hollow where the east wing had stood, a shape stirred, amorphous at first, like smoke given weight. Then it coalesced, tall, hunched, limbs too long, eyes two pits of smoldering amber. It didn't speak, but the air filled with a whisper that wasn't sound, a pressure behind the eyes that made Hermione stagger. "Don't look directly at it," Draco hissed, stepping in front of her. "It's not a creature. It's a guardian, or what's left of one. It's bound to the wards," she realized, catching her breath. "It's not attacking us. It's tried to protect what's left. Let the corruption. It's driving it mad." Another tremor. The ceiling above cracked, raining dust and splinters. A beam groaned, beginning to give way. "We don't have time to run," Draco said, gripping his wand tighter. "If this place falls, whatever's beneath it, whatever's keeping the magic alive, will break free. And I don't think anything good waits under centuries of buried sin." Hermione met his gaze. In that moment there was no past between them. No taunts, no war, no blood status. Just two people standing in the ruins of a legacy too heavy to carry alone. "Then we hold it together," she said. They turned as one. Draco began the incantation first, a Malfoy heir's ward renewal chant, ancient and guttural, words that hadn't been spoken aloud in generations. His voice cracked, but didn't break. Hermione answered with a counter-harmony, a binding spell woven from research in forbidden archives and half-remembered myths. Her magic was precise, warm gold threading through his silver blue. The air between them shimmered. The creature shrieked, not in rage, but in recognition. The wards flared, surging like a wounded beast, lashing out. Cracks spiderwebbed across the courtyard, flames erupting not from wood, but from stone. Hermione gritted her teeth, pouring more power into the spell. She could feel Draco's magic, cold, proud, laced with shame and something deeper, a desire to mend. "Now," she cried. They shifted in unison, weaving their spells into a single lattice of light. Hermione reached, not for Draco's hand, but for the thread of his intent, the fragile trust between them. She pulled it into her own rhythm, balancing his ancestral weight with her relentless will, the lattice expanding, arching over the ruins like a dome. Below, the creature writhed, then stilled. The amber eyes dimmed, then softened to a flicker of gold, like candlelight through old glass. The ground ceased trembling. The dome pulsed once, twice, then settled into a low, steady glow, sinking into the earth, like roots taking hold. Silence. Draco exhaled, swaying. Hermione caught his arm before he fell. "We didn't fix it," he whispered. "No," she said, watching the ruins in the stone begin to glow with a cleaner light. "But we gave it a chance." Above them, the first stars pierced the smoke-heavy sky, and beneath their feet, the house, old, wounded, watching, finally stopped fighting. The air in the ruins was thick with the scent of wet ash and old iron, the kind that clung to the back of the throat and made every breath a conscious effort. Hermione knelt on the cracked flagstones, her fingers brushing the edge of a sigil half erased by fire and time. It pulsed faintly under her touch, a slow, reluctant thrum like a heart learning to beat again. Draco stood a few paces behind, his cloak pulled tight against the creeping chill that had nothing to do with the weather. His face was pale, jaw clenched as he watched the shadows coil at the edges of the courtyard, shadows that no longer hissed. It had taken hours, hours of whispered incantations, of Hermione tracing forgotten wards with wand and fingertip, of Draco speaking names he'd only heard in nightmares, names of ancestors who had bound their blood to this place. The Guardian had risen from the ashes like smoke given teeth and eyes, a shifting mass of charred stone and spectral flame, born of ancient magic and centuries of resentment. It had known blood, and it had demanded blood in return, but Hermione had stood between it and Draco, wand raised not in attack but in offering. "You're not just a weapon," she'd said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "You were meant to protect, not punish." Silence. Then a low grinding sound, like stone dragging over stone. "I am bound," it had answered, its voice the echo of 1,000 cracked hearths, "by blood, by fire, by silence." "Then let us speak," she'd replied, "not as master and servant, not as Malfoy and enemy, as those who remain." Draco had stepped forward then, against every instinct. He'd removed his glove, pressed his palm to the sigil at the center of the courtyard, the one Hermione had uncovered, older than the family tree, older than the manor itself. "I am Draco," he'd said, voice rough. "Last of my line, if you will it. But I do not ask for dominion. I ask for understanding." The ground had trembled. The flames in the Guardian's hollow eyes had flickered, dimmed, then reformed into something softer, golden, almost warm. And then slowly it had bowed. Now in the quiet aftermath, the ruins felt different. Not healed, nothing could undo the fire, the years of neglect, the weight of what had been done in this place, but open, like a wound finally allowed to breathe. Hermione exhaled, slowly pushing herself to her feet. Her legs ached, and her magic felt scraped thin, but there was a strange lightness in her chest. "It's not gone," she said, voice low. "It's waiting." Draco stepped closer, his boots crunching over ash. "You think it'll stay? If we give it reason?" She turned to him. "It wasn't evil, Draco. It was loyal, just misused." He looked away, jaw working. "My father would say that loyalty without purpose is chaos." "And you?" she asked. He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I'm beginning to think purpose can be chosen." A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of rain. High above, the clouds were breaking, and for the first time in days, a sliver of moonlight touched the courtyard. Where it fell, the sigil glowed, not with fire but with a soft silver light. Hermione smiled, just slightly. "It remembers the stars." Draco looked at her then, really looked, really saw her, not as a relic of war or a symbol of everything his family had scorned, but as someone who had walked into hell with him and refused to let go. "Thank you," he said. She met his gaze. "You're welcome." And in that moment, the house, what remained of it, settled. Not with a sigh, not with a groan, but with something like peace. The morning mist clung to the blackened spires like a shroud, curling around the fractured stone where ivy once climbed. Hermione stood at the edge of the ruin, her breath shallow, hands clasped tightly behind her back. The air still carried the acrid bite of scorched magic, ozone and ash, something deeper, older, like burnt parchment and iron. Behind her, Draco adjusted the collar of his charcoal gray coat, his face unreadable, but for the faint tension at his jaw. They had spent 3 nights sifting through the wreckage, uncovering sigils etched beneath floorboards, spells woven into mortar, enchantments older than the house of Malfoy itself. Hidden beneath the west wing, they'd found a chamber sealed with runes in a dialect even Hermione barely recognized. Sylph Vir, the language of the forgotten. And in the center of that chamber, a single obsidian mirror, cracked but humming with latent energy, its surface shifting like smoke when touched. Now the ministry was coming. A low crack split the silence as the first auror apparated into the courtyard. Then another, and another. Robes of deep blue marked them as specialists in structural magic and magical forensics. Kingsley Shacklebolt followed, his tall frame imposing even in stillness, his gaze sweeping the ruins with quiet intensity. "Miss Granger, Mr. Malfoy." His voice was calm, measured. "I trust you've made no further alterations to the site." Hermione stepped forward, spine straight. "We've documented everything. No spells cast, no objects moved beyond initial retrieval for analysis." Draco gave a slight incline of his head. "We've been careful. This isn't some cursed heirloom we're playing with. It's a tomb with a pulse." Kingsley's brow lifted. "A poetic assessment. But I'd prefer facts." She opened a leather satchel at her side, and withdrew a stack of scrolls, their edges singed. The fire wasn't accidental. It followed a precise pattern, concentrated in areas with the weakest enchantments, as if drawn to them. The wards didn't fail, they were consumed. One of the aurors, a wiry woman with silver streaks in her braid, stepped forward. "Consumed? By what?" Hermione hesitated. "We believe something was awakened. The enchantments beneath the manor, they're not defensive, they're containment, and they're unraveling." A murmur passed through the group. Draco exhaled sharply through his nose. "My ancestors didn't build this house on land. They built it on something they bound." Kingsley studied him. "And you're certain of this?" "I've seen the names carved in the foundation stone," Draco said, voice low. "Names that predate wizarding records. Names that shouldn't exist. And the mirror, it shows things, not reflections, memories. My father's, my mother's, but also others. Faces I don't know, screaming in a language no one speaks anymore." Hermione glanced at him, surprised by the rawness in his voice. He hadn't spoken of the mirror's visions before. Not like this. Kingsley turned to the team. "Begin full survey. Reinforce perimeter wards. No one enters the lower chambers without written clearance." As the auras dispersed, wands already tracing detection spells in the air, Kingsley remained. "You two are to report directly to me. Every detail, no omissions." "We're not hiding anything," Hermione said. "No," Kingsley said, eyes narrowing slightly. "But you're invested, one of you by blood, the other by nature. That clouds judgment." Draco's fingers curled at his side. "I don't care about legacy. I care about what's still down there." "And what is it?" Kingsley asked. Hermione met his gaze. "We don't know, not yet, but it remembers us, and it's waking up." The morning sun slanted through the grimy windows of the leaky cauldron, catching dust motes in the air like sparks. Hermione sat tucked into a corner booth, a steaming cup of tea cooling untouched before her. Her fingers drummed against the edge of the parchment she'd been reviewing, a translated fragment of an old warding script, when the whispers started. At first they were faint, the usual murmur of morning patrons catching up over breakfast. But then a name sliced through the noise. Star, Malfoy Star. She stiffened, though she didn't look up. "Can you believe it?" A witch in emerald robes leaned across her table, voice hushed but sharp. "Hermione Granger, of all people, seen at Malfoy Manor. Twice this week, and not just visiting, mind you. Wearing the same boots for 3 days straight. Working star with star him." Hermione exhaled slowly, willing herself to focus on the looping script in front of her. The warding symbols were complex, layered like sediment, and she needed to trace the root enchantments before they could even begin to dismantle them. But the words around her clung like cobwebs. "She fought him in school," someone else said. "They called each other Mudblood and Death Eater's brat. Now they're, what, partners?" A laugh, brittle and unkind. She finally looked up, jaw tight. The group at the nearby table, 3 witches and a wizard, froze mid-gossip, their faces flushing. One opened her mouth, likely to apologize, but Hermione didn't wait. She gathered her things, rolled the parchment with deliberate calm, and stepped out into Diagon Alley. The street was already crowded. Owl droppings speckled the cobblestones, and the scent of fresh ink and roasted chestnuts wove through the air. She pulled her cloak tighter, though the autumn chill wasn't the reason for the knot in her stomach. At flourish and blots, the clerk gaped at her, then quickly looked away. The young girl tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed. Hermione quickened her pace. She hadn't expected approval. She hadn't even expected understanding. But the weight of it, the judgment, the speculation was heavier than she imagined. It wasn't just the past between her and Draco. It was everything he represented. The war, the choices, the scars that never fully healed, no matter how many years passed. A hand caught her arm. She turned, wand half-drawn, and met gray eyes under a sweep of pale hair. Draco stood there, looking as if he'd apparated straight from a restless night. His coat was rumpled, and there was a smudge of soot on his collar. "You've seen the prophet, then?" She lowered her wand. "I didn't need to." He glanced over her shoulder toward the leaky cauldron. "They're saying we're sleeping together." Hermione blinked. "Their star, what star?" "Page 6, he said dryly. "Hermione Granger and the Fallen Ferret. A scandalous alliance." With a sketch. "You look surprisingly dignified." "This is absurd," she muttered, heat rising in her cheeks. "We've spent less than 12 hours together in the last week, and half of that was arguing about containment runes." "Tell that to Rita Skeeter," he said, and for the first time there was the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile. "She's already implied we're rekindling a secret romance from Hogwarts. Something about forbidden love beneath the dungeons." Hermione groaned, pressing her fingers to her temples. "I hate her. I star her." Draco shrugged, but his voice softened. "Let them talk. We've both survived worse." She looked at him, really looked. The shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there years ago. The manor wasn't just ruins. It was a mirror, and it was showing him things he wasn't ready to face. And yet, he'd asked for her help. She took a slow breath. "We should go back. The Eastern Wing's foundation is unstable, and if those wards collapse—" "I know," he said. "I had a dream about it last night. Stone cracking, voices in the walls." She studied him. "You're serious." He met her gaze. "I don't joke about things that whisper my name in the dark." A silence settled between them, heavier than the rumors, deeper than the past. Around them, the world kept moving. Shopkeepers haggling, children chasing owls, the clink of cauldrons at the apothecary. But here, on this quiet stretch of cobbles, something fragile had formed. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. The morning mist clung to the scorched earth like a shroud, curling around the broken foundation stones where roses once climbed trellises of wrought silver. Hermione stood at the edge of what had been the East Garden, her boots sinking slightly into the damp ash. The air still carried the faint, acrid bite of burnt magic, ozone and something older, something bitter beneath the nose. Draco followed a few paces behind, his cloak pulled tight despite the absence of wind. He hadn't spoken since they apparated in. She turned to him, brushing a strand of first hair from her face. "We should start with the ward stones. Without them, any restoration will be temporary. The land remembers the fire, but it doesn't have to remember the vulnerability." Draco's gaze drifted across the ruin. Stone steps led to nothing. A single marble column leaned like a drunkard against the skeleton of a greenhouse. "My father always said the wards were keyed to blood, that only a Malfoy could renew them." "And he was wrong," Hermione said gently, "or at least incomplete. Blood matters, yes, but intent matters more. The land responds to stewardship, not just ownership." He looked at her then, gray eyes narrowed, searching for mockery. Finding none, he exhaled through his nose. "Fine. Where do we begin?" They walked the perimeter in silence, marking spots with chalk and whispered incantations. Hermione carried a satchel of raw moonstone shards, new, unbound, still humming with potential. Draco carried nothing but his wand and the weight of memory. At each cardinal point, they knelt. At the north, where the old oak had stood, they planted the first stone. Hermione pressed her palm into the blackened soil. "Draco, your hand over mine." He hesitated, then knelt beside her, his fingers brushing hers before settling. She whispered the binding phrase in Old Tongue, low and steady, and the earth trembled, just once. Beneath their hands, the moonstone sank, and a thread of silver light spiraled outward, vanishing into the ground. Draco pulled his hand back as if burned. "I felt that, like a pulse." "The land accepting the ward," she said, brushing dirt from her knees. "It's not dead, just asleep, By midday they'd set 3 stones. The sky had cleared, pale sunlight filtering through high clouds. As they worked, small signs began to appear, the hesitant unfurling of a green shoot near the kitchen garden, a wisp of ivy creeping along a surviving wall. Not magic, not exactly. Just life, testing the air. They broke for tea at the edge of what had been the terrace. Hermione conjured a battered kettle and 2 chipped mugs. Draco stared into his, watching steam curl like ghosts. "You don't have to do this," he said suddenly. "No one would blame you for walking away." She sipped her tea. "Maybe not, but I want to stay." He looked up. "Why?" "Because someone has to remember what happened here," she said, "and someone has to make sure it doesn't happen again. Fire doesn't just destroy, it reveals. We've already found traces of enchantments older than your family's name. Someone buried things here, Draco. Secrets with roots." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, my mother used to say the house whispered at night. I thought she was just fragile. Grieving. Maybe she wasn't wrong," Hermione murmured. "Maybe the house was trying to tell her something." A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant rain. From the corner of her eye, Hermione thought she saw movement, just beneath the surface of the soil, near the west wall. A ripple, like something shifting deep underground. She didn't mention it, not yet. Instead, she stood, brushing her hands on her trousers. "One more ward stone. Then we'll check the library foundations. If the vault beneath survived," Draco rose slowly, meeting her gaze, "then we'll know what we're really dealing with." She nodded, and together they walked toward the last corner of the grounds, where the earth waited, breathing just beneath their feet. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and charred wood, even now, weeks after the fire. The moon hung low over the skeletal remains of Malfoy Manor, casting long, silver-blue shadows across the rubble-strewn courtyard. Hermione stood near what had once been the East Wing Library, her fingers brushing over a half-buried book spine, its pages fused shut by heat and rain. She didn't move when she heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching over broken glass and ash. "You're still here," Draco said, stopping a few paces behind her. His voice was softer than she expected, stripped of its usual edge. "I could say the same," she replied without turning. "It's late. So is rebuilding a legacy," he said, stepping closer. He wore a dark cloak, pulled tight against the autumn chill, his hair uncharacteristically disheveled. "Even one you didn't ask for." She finally turned, studying his face in the moonlight. There were shadows beneath his eyes, not just from lack of sleep but from something deeper, something that had clawed its way out of the ruins with them. "You didn't have to come back at all," she said gently. "No," he agreed, "but it's mine, for better or worse, and I'd rather face it sober than run from it in a panic." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind whispering through the gaps in the walls like a secret being passed from stone to stone. "Do you ever wonder," she began, hesitant, "if the house wanted to burn?" He looked at her sideways. "That's a strange thing to say." "It's not," she insisted. "These enchantments beneath the foundation, they're older than your family, older than Hogwarts maybe, and they've been dormant for centuries. But now that the wards are cracked, they're stirring, like something waking up." He exhaled slowly, his breath, a pale fog in the cold. "I used to think the manor was just stone and magic, a symbol. But now I feel it, like a pulse, under the floorboards. Like it remembers things I don't." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "What if the fire wasn't an attack? What if it was a release?" He turned to her, then really looked at her, her frayed sleeves, the ink stain on her thumb, the quiet certainty in her eyes. "You think the house set itself on fire?" "I think it wanted to be seen," she said. "Not as a monument to pure-blood arrogance, but as something alive, forgotten, and maybe, in its own way, crying out." Draco looked away, his jaw tightening. "My father would say that sentimental nonsense." "Your father," she said carefully, "never listened to the walls." A faint, humorless laugh escaped him. "And you do?" "I've learned to," she said. "After the war, after everything, I started noticing things. The way certain places hold memories, the way magic lingers in old stones. This place. It's not just haunted by the past. It's made of it." He leaned against a crumbling pillar, arms crossed. "You know, I used to hate you. Truly. Not just because of blood or house rivalry, because you represented everything I wasn't. Sure, principled, unafraid to speak, and I was just expected to be a Malfoy. Hermione didn't respond right away. She walked to a patch of ground where the earth was scorched in a perfect circle, untouched by rebuilding. I hated you too, she admitted. But not for the reasons you think. I hated that you made it so easy to see you as the enemy, because then I didn't have to wonder if you were just scared. He flinched, almost imperceptibly. And now, he asked. Now I see a man standing in the ashes of his family's sins, trying to rebuild something that might not want to be rebuilt. And I see someone who hasn't slept in days because he's afraid of what he'll dream. He looked at her then, and for the first time, there was no mask. Just exhaustion, and something fragile beneath it. I dream of fire, he said quietly, but not the kind that destroys, the kind that purifies, like it's burning away names, titles, bloodlines, and beneath it, there's something else, a voice, a presence, not my father's, not anyone's, and it calls my name, not Malfoy, but Draco, just Draco. Hermione reached out, then stalked herself, but her voice was warm when she spoke. Maybe it's not a curse, maybe it's an invitation. He met her gaze, and in the silence between them, the house seemed to breathe. Smoke still curled from the blackened stones of Malfoy Manor in thin ghostly ribbons, rising like whispered secrets into the dawn. The air smelled of charred oak and something older, damp earth, ancient rooms, the metallic tang of spent magic. Hermione stood at the edge of what had once been the east wing, her boots crunching over shattered marble and ash. Beside her, Draco knelt, fingers brushing the cracked foundation stone, his face unreadable in the pale light. "It's gone," he said, voice low. "All of it. The library, the portrait gallery, the study where my father kept the Black family records. Gone." Hermione didn't answer right away. She was watching the ground, specifically a faint pulsing glow beneath a slab of fallen masonry. It hadn't been there yesterday. She crouched, murmuring a quick detection charm under her breath. The glow intensified, spreading in delicate root-like veins across the stone. "Draco," she said softly. "Look." He turned, one eyebrow arched, but when he saw the light, something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, of awe. Slowly he reached out. The moment his fingers touched the stone, the ground trembled, just once, like a deep breath drawn, after long silence. Then the slab split cleanly down the middle, revealing a hollow beneath. Inside lay an object no larger than a palm, shaped like a twisted knot of silver, an obsidian, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the faint hum, now resonating through the ruins. It looked both ancient and alive, as if forged from moonlight and shadow. "What is it?" Hermione whispered. Draco didn't speak. He lifted it carefully, cradling it in both hands. The moment it left the earth, the hum deepened, spreading outward in a wave that made the air shimmer. Vines, real, living vines, began to curl from the cracked soil, winding up the ruins, unfurling tender green leaves, even as frost still clung to the morning grass. "It's a ward stone," Draco said at last, voice thick, "but not one I've ever seen. It's attuned to the land, to the bloodline, but not just the Malfoys. It remembers before us." Hermione touched one of the vines. It warmed beneath her fingers, as if greeting her. "The entity, the one we freed, it left this behind. A gift, a key," Draco corrected, "or a seal. It's binding something, protecting it." They watched as the glow from the wardstone pulsed once, then sank into Draco's skin, vanishing beneath the pale sleeve of his robe. He gasped, just slightly, and staggered back a step. Hermione caught his arm. "Are you all right?" He looked at her, then really looked at her, and for the first time since they'd begun this strange journey, there was no mask, no sarcasm, no old bitterness, just exhaustion and something softer. Gratitude, maybe, or understanding. "It's not just mine anymore," he said. "It's shared. The land, it accepts you too." She didn't ask what he meant. She could feel it, the quiet thrum beneath her feet, the way the air had changed. The ruins weren't dead. They were sleeping, and now they were waking. A bird called from the edge of the scorched woods, clear, bright, alive. The first sound of morning, there wasn't a creak of settling stone or groan of wind through broken windows. Draco closed his hand around the space where the wardstone had been. Whatever's coming, it won't be just me holding this together. Hermione smiled, faint, but sure. No, it won't. And as the sun rose over the wreckage, new green creeping through the ash like hope through grief, they stood side by side, not enemies, not quite friends, but something new, keepers, together. The morning mist clung to the scorched earth like a shroud, curling around the broken columns and blackened stones of what had once been Malfoy Manor. Draco stood at the edge of the ruin, his boots scuffed from digging through debris, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, something no Malfoy heir would have allowed a decade ago. The air still carried the acrid bite of burnt magic, a scent that clung to the back of the throat and made the eyes water. He didn't flinch. Hermione arrived quietly, her steps muffled by the damp ash. She carried a satchel slung over one shoulder, its contents clinking faintly. Files, notes, a charred fragment wrapped in cloth. She hesitated before speaking. "You're here early." Draco didn't turn. "It's not early. I never left." She studied him. The dark circles under his eyes, the way his hair fell loose across his forehead, unpolished and unstyled. There were no robes today, just a charcoal coat and a worn scarf. He looked less like a pure-blood aristocrat, and more like someone who had finally learned to carry his own weight. "You didn't have to stay," she said carefully. "No," he agreed, voice low, "but someone should." He bent down, brushing soot from a cracked marble tile, the crest barely visible beneath centuries of enchantment and fire. His fingers lingered over the serpent motif, now fractured, its eyes hollowed out by heat. "I used to think this place was invincible," he murmured, "that the name on the gate was enough to keep everything standing, but it wasn't the name. It was the magic beneath it, older than my father, older than Lucius's father, and we never even knew it was there." Hermione knelt beside him, setting the satchel down. The runes beneath the foundation, they're pre-Wiccan, older than Hogwarts. Someone buried something here, Draco. Not just a house, a ward, a prison maybe. He exhaled, long and slow, and we lit the match without knowing. "It wasn't your fault." The fire, it didn't start from within the wards. It was drawn to them, like a beacon. He looked at her then, really looked. His gray eyes stripped of their old arrogance, replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. "Doesn't change when I feel." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a hand on the stone, whispering an incantation. A faint blue glow pulsed beneath her palm, flickering like a dying star. The ground trembled, just once. "It's still alive," she said. "Not the house. Something beneath it." Draco closed his eyes. "I know." When he opened them again, there was no fear, only resolve. "I'm not leaving again," he said. "Not until I know what we woke up. Not until I know if it's something we can fix, or contain." Hermione studied his profile, the sharp angle of his jaw, the new lines etched beside his mouth. The boy who once sneered at her in a train compartment was gone. This man had buried his father, survived a war he never wanted, and now stood in the wreckage of everything he'd been taught to revere, and yet he stayed. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. He almost smiled. "Funny. I used to think asking for help was weakness. And now? Now, I think it's the only way anything ever gets rebuilt." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small warped key, twisted by heat but still intact. "I found this in the ashes of the study. It doesn't fit any lock in the house, but it hums when I hold it near the east wall." Hermione took it gently, turning it in her fingers. "This isn't wizard-made. The metal, it's not iron, not silver. I've seen something like it in old texts. Ward keepers use them. Guardians." Draco nodded. "Then maybe that's what I am now, not an heir. A guardian." The wind stirred, lifting the ash into slow spirals. Somewhere beneath their feet, the earth sighed. And for the first time in years, Draco Malfoy stood not as a descendant of a fallen name, but as someone choosing what came next. The ministry seal cracked like thin ice beneath Hermione's thumb, the parchment curling in the damp morning air. Around them, the ruins of Malfoy Manor exhaled grey mist, tendrils of smoke still threading through fractured stone and blackened beams. The investigation was over. No arson, no dark magic, the report said. Just an unfortunate confluence of unstable wards and elemental backlash. A polite lie. Hermione tucked the document into her coat, the weight of it heavier than paper should be. Draco stood at the edge of what had once been the East Wing, his back straight, his face unreadable. He hadn't spoken since the Aurors left. The wind tugged at the sleeves of his charcoal coat. Too fine for the wreckage, too familiar in its cut. He looked like a ghost haunting his own grave. "They're gone," he said finally, not turning. "No more questions, no more inspections. Just us and the bones of the house." Hermione stepped carefully over a slab of cracked marble. "The stabilization spells are holding, for now, but the wards are still reactive. I felt them shift when I cast the perimeter charm this morning." Draco exhaled, a thin plume in the cold. "They've always been alive, just sleeping." She studied him. There was a new softness in the lines around his eyes, not from kindness, but from exhaustion. Or grief. "You knew, didn't you? Before the fire, that something was wrong." "I didn't star no star," he corrected, voice low. "I felt it, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. Mother used to say the house remembered things we forgot. I thought it was just her superstition." Hermione crouched beside a scorched archway, brushing soot from a carved sigil. 3 interlocking circles, half melted into obsidian. "This isn't Malfoy work. This predates your family by centuries. The enchantments. They're older than Hogwarts, maybe. And they weren't meant to protect. They were meant to star. Contain star." Draco turned then, his gaze sharp. "Contain what?" She didn't answer right away. The air had gone still. Even the wind held its breath. From somewhere beneath the rubble, a low hum vibrated through the stone, like a lullaby sung in a language with no words. "We'll need to anchor the foundation runes before the next moon," she said, standing. "If the containment fails during the lunar pull." "I know what happens," he said quietly. "The house wakes up." They worked in silence after that, side by side, repairing what could be repaired, reinforcing what could not. Hermione wove layers of stabilizing incantations through the ruins, her wand tracing luminous threads in the air. Draco followed with ancestral counterspells, his voice rough but sure, syllables his father had once drilled into him like punishment. The magic responded to him, reluctantly, but it responded. As dusk bled into violet twilight, they reached the heart of the estate, the sunken garden where the oldest roots of the house still pulsed beneath the earth. The air shimmered faintly, like heat over stone. Hermione placed her palm flat against the ground. "There's something down there. Not a creature. Not exactly. It's aware." Draco knelt beside her. "Then it's not over." "No," she said. "It's just beginning." He looked at her then, really looked. Her hair loose from its braid, streaked with ash, her eyes tired but unyielding. "Why did you come back? After everything, why help me?" She met his gaze. "Because someone has to remember, and someone has to decide what comes next." Above them, the first star blinked into being. Below, the earth sighed, and the house, in its ruin, held its breath. The wind carried the scent of burnt oak and old magic, as Hermione stood at the edge of what had once been the southern terrace of Malfoy Manor. The sun hung low, a bruised orange behind the skeletal trees, casting long shadows across the rubble. She clutched her cloak tighter. The wool frayed at the edges from weeks of restless nights, and too many spells cast under pressure. Her bag, charmed to carry more than it should, rested heavily on her shoulder, filled with scrolls of translated enchantments, shards of blackened marble etched, with runes and small sealed vial of ash that pulsed faintly when touched. She should go. She needed star to go. The ministry expected her report by morning, and Harry had sent 3 owls already, each more concerned than the last. "You've been there too long, Hermione," the last one had said. "He's not worth your silence." But Draco wasn't silent. Not anymore. She turned, eyes drawing once more to the ruin. The manor had not collapsed entirely. Some walls still stood, leaning like weary sentinels, their stones cracked but stubborn. The fire had not consumed everything, only what it wanted. That was the truth. They'd uncovered slowly, painfully. The flames had spared certain rooms, certain corridors, as if guided by something older than the Malfoys, older than wizarding Britain itself. The enchantments buried beneath the foundation were protective. They were star-hungering star, and whatever lived in the ashes, something with a voice like dry leaves scraping stone, had begun to whisper to Draco in his sleep. She'd heard him once, standing outside his makeshift study, the door ajar, moonlight spilling across the floor. "It knows my name," he muttered, voice raw. "It's been waiting for a Malfoy whose star remembers star." Hermione shivered. She didn't understand it all yet. But she knew this. Draco wasn't the boy who'd called her a mudblood in a shop full of wands. He wasn't even the broken young man who'd cowered in a dungeon while his aunt tortured her friends. He was something else now. Cautious, yes, proud still, but stripped of pretense. He asked questions. He listened. He'd handed her his family's most guarded grimoire without flinching, and said, "You're better with ancient wards than I'll ever be." A flicker in the rubble caught her eye. Not fire, something softer, a faint blue shimmer beneath a slab of fallen masonry. She stepped forward, hesitated, then knelt, brushing away soot and gravel. Her fingers closed around a small warm stone, smooth, almost alive. It pulsed, once, then dimmed. "Don't pick that up." Draco's voice, close behind her. She didn't startle. She was starting to recognize the rhythm of his presence, the way he moved like a shadow learning to walk in the light. "It's still active," he said, crouching beside her. His hair was longer now, tousled from the wind, and there was a smudge of ash on his jaw. "That's a hearthstone. My grandmother used to say they were anchors, for memories, for souls." Hermione looked at him. "You never mentioned that before." "I didn't believe it," he admitted. "But I do now." They sat in silence for a moment, the ruins breathing around them. A breeze stirred the ashes, lifting them like gray snow. "You're leaving," he said, not a question. She nodded. "I have to. There's too much question, scrutiny. If they find out we've been working with pre-wizard magic, unregistered and unmonitored, they'll lock us both away," he finished. "Or worse, try to weaponize it." She met his gaze. His eyes, gray cold in memory, were anything but now. Tired, haunted, but clear. "I could come with you," he said quietly, "just for a few days. To the ministry. You shouldn't face them alone." She almost laughed. "You walk into the ministry? After everything?" "I'm not the same," he said, and there was no defensiveness in it. Only weariness, and something like hope. "No," she whispered. "You're not." The stone in her hand warmed again, gently, like a heartbeat. Somewhere beneath the rubble something stirred. Not fire, not yet. But the past was not done with them, and neither, Hermione realized, was she. The night air clung to their skin like damp silk, thick with the scent of wet stone and charred wood. Above them, the sky had cleared after hours of brooding clouds, revealing a spill of stars so sharp they seemed to cut the dark. Hermione knelt in the ashen circle, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the final wardstone into its carved socket. It fit with a soft click that resonated through the ground, a sound like bone meeting bone. Draco stood a step behind, his wand held low, its tip still faintly glowing with the strain of the incantations they'd woven together all evening. "It's ready," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the stone, blackened marble veined with silver, the same as the others. They'd reassembled in a perfect ring around the heart of the ruined manor. It had taken weeks to find them, scattered like broken teeth across the estate, hidden beneath collapsed stairwells and buried in overgrown gardens. Each one inscribed with runes older than the Malfoy name, older than wizarding law. And now, with the last piece in place, the earth beneath them began to hum. "Do you feel that?" Draco asked, his voice rough. Hermione nodded, like a pulse. "It's responding." They had argued for days about whether to complete the ritual. The ministry wanted the ruins dismantled, the land purified, declaring the Malfoy estate too dangerous to restore. But Hermione had seen the truth in a library's surviving scrolls. These wards were dark magic. They were protective, ancient, predating the family by centuries, and they were failing. Without rebinding, the land would rot from the inside, poisoned by whatever had been sealed beneath it. "You really think this will hold?" Draco asked, crouching beside her. She looked at him, then really looked. His face was thinner than it had been in school, shadows deepening the lines beside his eyes. But there was something else, something softer, worn in by sleepless nights and shared silences. "It has to," she said. "The wards weren't meant to keep people out. They were meant to keep something in." A cold wind stirred the ashes between the stones. Somewhere deep below, a low groan echoed through the earth, like stones shifting after centuries of stillness. "Now," Hermione said. Together they raised their wands. The incantation came not from a book, but from memory, pieced together from fragments, whispered in the dark corners of old texts. Their voices wove together, hesitant at first, then stronger. Latin and something older, something that tasted like iron and salt on the tongue. The ward stones began to glow, veins of silver brightening like lit candles beneath the surface. The ground shivered. Draco's hand brushed hers. Accidental or not, she couldn't tell. But he didn't pull away, neither did she. Light erupted from the ring, a column of shimmering silver that shot into the sky, scattering stars from its path. The air crackled. Hermione felt it in her teeth, in her ribs, a pressure building, and then releasing. The light folded in on itself, sinking into the earth, sealing the circle. Silence. Then a breath. Not theirs. It came from the center of the ring, where the ashes had begun to swirl, not with the wind, but with purpose. A single ember rose, glowing faintly, pulsing like a distant heart. Draco stepped forward, wand raised, but Hermione caught his arm. "Wait." The ember didn't move toward them. It hovered, still watching. "It knows us," she murmured. "Knows what we've done," he corrected, voice low. "Or what we've undone." Above, the stars seemed to settle back into place. The air grew still. The weight that had pressed on the estate for generations, the silence, the dread, had shifted. Not gone, but balanced. For the first time in years, Draco Malfoy exhaled like a man unchained. "We should go," Hermione said, though she didn't move. "One more moment," he said. And they stayed side by side, in the ashes of what was, watching the last pulse of ancient magic settle into the earth, like a secret finally kept. The air at Malfoy Manor still carried the scent of char and old magic, even weeks after the fire. Hermione stood at the edge of what had once been the East Wing, her boots crunching over blackened marble and splintered wainscoting. Frost feathered the runes in the early light, delicate as lace over scorched stone. She breathed in slowly, the cold air sharp in her lungs, and exhaled a pale cloud that curled like a whisper over the wreckage. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like a beginning, uneasy, uncertain, but undeniably alive. She heard footsteps behind her, soft and measured. Draco approached without his usual drawl, without the armor of sarcasm or superiority. He wore a charcoal gray coat, collar turned up against the wind, his hair loose and wind tousle for once. He didn't look at her. Instead, he stared at the skeletal remains of the grand staircase, its iron balustrade twisted like wilted ivy. "It wasn't supposed to burn," he said, voice low. "Not like this." "Not all of it." Hermione turned to him. "Maybe it wasn't meant to last." He glanced at her. Then, gray eyes clouded with something she couldn't name. Grief, perhaps, or something older. "You think the house was flawed?" "I think it was burdened," she said carefully. "By generations of choices, by silence, by things buried too deep." A bitter half-smile touched his lips, and now the earth has spat them up. They had spent nights together in this ruin, sorting through spell-damaged grimoires, tracing sigils etched into scorched floorboards, deciphering wards that pulsed faintly beneath the ash. At first, it had been necessity, Hermione's knowledge of ancient enchantments, Draco's reluctant access to family records. But somewhere between translating a crumbling Saxon ward and discovering the hidden chamber beneath the wine cellar, where something ancient had whispered in a language even the star Liber Vamistral star couldn't fully translate, their partnership had shifted. It wasn't friendship, not quite, but it was something warmer than alliance. She remembered the night they found the heart of the enchantment, a pulsing core of blue light buried beneath the foundation stones, wrapped in chains of forgotten magic. Draco had fallen to his knees, not in fear, but in recognition. My mother, he'd whispered. She bound it, not to protect the house, to protect a star. Hermione had knelt beside him, then, her hand hovering over the chains. She knew it was alive. It's not a star, Draco had said, voice raw. It's a memory, a promise, a refusal to die. Now, standing amid the frost and ruin, Hermione watched as a single green shoot pushed through a crack in the blackened flagstone. She crouched, brushing away ash. The plant was unfamiliar, slender, its leaves edged in silver, trembling slightly, as if breathing. "It's growing back," she said. Draco stepped closer, frowning. "Nothing grows here, not since the war. Not with the dark magic seeping through the soil. This one does," she said, wonder threading her voice. "Maybe because the enchantment is weakening, or maybe because it's finally free." He crouched beside her, close enough that their sleeves brushed. For a moment neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, as it once would have been. It was companionable, like the quiet between old friends who no longer need words. "You know," he said finally, "I used to hate this place, hated what it stood for, what it made me. And now?" she asked. He looked around, at the broken columns, the ivy reclaiming the walls, the sky opening wide above the ruin, like a wound slowly healing. "Now I think it just needed to burn," he said, "to make room." Hermione smiled, faint but true. "Maybe we both did." A breeze stirred through the ruins, carrying the scent of damp earth, and something sweet, like blossoms on the edge of spring. Above them, a single bird called, sharp and clear, as if announcing the return of something long thought lost.